As several women, including Korone, watch intently, Amami Yuito performs a demonstration. Amami expresses his admiration for Normim's precise work, while Korone admits she doesn't quite understand what happened. He explains that to establish standard measurements for the hospital, he had Normim create a 10-centimeter cubed box, which perfectly holds 1 liter of liquid. Alec observes that Amami's measurements differ from their own, but Amami explains that greater care is required in a hospital. The woman with glasses finds his units of measurement fascinating and eagerly asks to be taught. Intrigued, Amami asks to learn their methods as well, before inquiring if the Chancellor had any other business with them. The woman with glasses suddenly remembers her purpose and apologizes for the distraction. Chancellor Maillard explains that they are holding a banquet for guests from the country of the night and that the guests specifically insisted on Amami's attendance. Surprised by the personal invitation, Amami questions if he is the one being invited. Alec immediately interjects, declaring that as Amami's guard, they will be attending as well to prevent any trouble. 2 new figures arrive, greeting the group. Chancellor Maillard apologizes, explaining that the guest was so eager to meet Amami that she came herself. Amami, looking at the newcomers, asks Maillard if they are indeed from the country of the night. The young woman introduces herself as Chloe, the 3rd princess of the country of the night. With a polite smile, she says it's a pleasure to meet them. She expresses her hope that they will get along well, addressing Amami Yuito by name. Amami is left completely stunned by the direct address from royalty. Later, at a banquet, Amami asks about the country of the night. Chloe's tall guardian describes his visit there as dreadful, noting the streets were empty during the day. Chloe cryptically explains what this means, inviting Amami to visit at night if he so pleases. Korone innocently asks if everyone there simply prefers the night. Chloe's expression shifts as she prepares to answer Korone's question. Her words leave Korone and Amami looking on in surprise. She explains that the night is their birdcage, something they adore because it offers protection from the sun. Chloe's grandfather reveals that as vampires, they have long been cursed by the sun and can only live their lives during the night. The revelation shocks Korone, Amami, and Alec. Amami, leaning past Shia, presses him, asking what he means by a curse. The grandfather reveals his hand, its skin blistered and discolored from sun exposure. A medical explanation identifies the condition as photodermatosis, a group of diseases triggered by sun exposure. He apologizes for the sight, but Amami immediately identifies the condition as photodermatosis. The grandfather explains that because of this danger, he has a request for them. He notes how the once dark cave is now lit by spores and how many races live in harmony with a kind-hearted healing magician. He asks if they would be willing to help find a solution for his country, which is captured by darkness, even if it's only a glimmer of hope. Amami, Korone, and Alec listen intently to the heartfelt plea. Korone anxiously turns to Amami, who immediately agrees to help. His attention is then drawn to Chloe's untouched plate of food. He notes the meat, beans, and bread, realizing she hasn't eaten any of it. Amami asks what the residents of the country of the night typically eat. In response, Chloe presents their staple food, a special maize they call plum. She explains it is the only thing that grows in their barren soil, and her grandfather confirms her statement. Amami announces that he may have a way to help their condition, though he cautions it's just a possibility. Chloe and her grandfather are stunned by his sudden declaration. Korone excitedly asks if it's true. Alec demands to know what he means, and Amami begins to explain that the so-called curse of the sun is actually a known condition. Amami confidently diagnoses their affliction as most likely being pellagra. When Alec asks for clarification, Amami explains that it's a disease caused by a deficiency in a specific nutrient, niacin, also known as vitamin B3. A detailed explanation reveals pellagra is a metabolic disorder linked to diets heavily reliant on maize that hasn't been properly processed. Chloe desperately asks if he can do something about the pellagra. Amami confirms that he can, adding that the sickness is prevalent in people who solely consume maize. The princess's grandfather is aghast, realizing their staple food, the plum, is the cause of their suffering. The grandfather reiterates that plum is their only staple food. The elven woman states that while the people of the world tree want to help, they are unable to provide an alternative food source for the entire country of the night. Seeing the dilemma, Korone looks to her master with concern. Amami appears to have an idea. Amami has a breakthrough, exclaiming that they can solve the problem by turning the maize into tortillas. The others are confused by the unfamiliar term. He explains that it's a treatment method called Nixamalization, where washing the kernels in lye before crushing and frying them unlocks the necessary nutrients. An explanation clarifies that nixtamalization makes essential nutrients in maize absorbable. Realizing this is their only chance, the grandfather looks on with hope. Though she doesn't fully understand, Chloe bows deeply, pleading with Amami to teach them how to make tortillas. The next day, Amami enthusiastically announces that it's time to make tortillas. The visitors from the country of the night gather around, ready to learn. Korone cheers, excited to begin their collaborative effort. Chloe expresses some hesitation to Amami, stating she is uncertain about Korone's abilities. She explains that given her country's dire situation, it is hard to trust just anyone. Amami asks if Korone's presence is truly necessary. Amami looks at Korone, concerned by the question. Amami confidently vouches for Korone, assuring Chloe that she is bright, serious, and someone he relies on greatly. Flustered but determined, Korone promises she can be trusted. Hearing this, Chloe seems to accept her presence. Chloe apologizes to Korone for her earlier prudence. Amami begins the lesson, instructing everyone to boil the maize carbs in lye prepared for soap making. Alec worries if the tortillas will smell bad, but Amami dismisses the concern. He asks Korone to start a 20-minute sand timer, another of Normim's precise creations. As Alec complains about the wait, Amami explains that while the process normally takes overnight, he has a shortcut. He reveals a bucket of treated maize he prepared yesterday, which is now soft and golden. He triumphantly declares this is proof that the nixtamalization process has worked, to the group's amazement. Alec expresses concern that Amami woke up early just to prepare the maize, admonishing him to get proper sleep. Undeterred, Amami moves on, instructing them to wash the carbs. He then demonstrates how to remove the kernels from the carb. Korone eagerly volunteers for the next step, squashing the prepared kernels. Korone gets to work mashing the kernels, and Amami praises her for being a natural, while Alec comments that it looks boring. Amami then demonstrates the next steps, taking the resulting paste and rolling it into a ball. He flattens the dough by kneading it out. Finally, he cooks the flatbread on both sides in a pan, and the pleasant aroma surprises everyone. With the tortillas finally done, everyone is ready to taste them. They are delighted by the delicious taste. The group agrees that the tortillas have a simple flavor with a sweet aftertaste. Even Princess Chloe partakes, taking her first bite of the potential cure for her people. Chloe finds the tortilla to be quite delectable. She wonders aloud if something so delicious could really be the cure for their curse, and Amami replies that it is possible. As a ray of light seems to shine down on her, Chloe is filled with hope. Chloe's grandfather, who had felt hopeless, now urges her to continue down this path, convinced that with such a delicious solution, they can succeed. She turns to Amami and expresses her humblest gratitude. Amami presents a variety of fillings, meat, spicy fruit, and what Alec calls stinky leaves. He explains that these are called tacos, and that he chose ingredients that resemble what he knows. Alec asks if she can pick out the spicy and smelly components, but Amami insists they are best eaten together. After taking a bite, Alec is utterly blown away by the flavor. She declares the taco delicious and runs off, demanding Amami teach her how to make them as well. The celebration is interrupted when an injured soldier is brought in, supported by a comrade. Amami immediately takes charge, directing them to bring the injured man his way. Chloe rushes to him, asking why he's injured, and the soldier apologizes profusely. The soldier's friend explains that he drank too much of the excellent local kelwisha and crashed into a wall. The injured man expresses his shame. Amami reassures him that he'll treat anyone who's hurt. Korone examines the injury and tells her master that it looks like the bone isn't broken. Korone offers to wash the soldier's abrasion. He protests, worried that water will hurt the wound. Korone uses saline solution, explaining that it won't sting, and the soldier is amazed to find there's no pain. Chloe reflects that while she was dubious about a beastwoman using healing magic, Korone's clear skill leaves no room for doubt. She is convinced that Korone is a true disciple of the magician. She approaches Korone and offers a sincere apology for doubting her abilities earlier. Chloe confesses that as a vampire unable to use healing magic, she was jealous of Korone's exceptional talent. Korone quickly insists that's not true. She excitedly explains that Amami told her that anyone can learn these skills, even her. Korone reveals that she was a slave until recently and is now learning from her master. Her words resonate deeply with Chloe. The idea that she too could learn and bring healing magic to her country fills Chloe with hope. Inspired, Chloe implores Amami to take her as a disciple too. Her grandfather immediately objects, but Chloe passionately retorts that he should understand the value of healing magic. Amami smiles, stating that his reason for being in this world is to give information on treatment to as many people as possible. Hearing him agree to teach her, the grandfather is left utterly stunned. A blushing Chloe humbly asks them to treat her well, acknowledging her inexperience. Amami happily welcomes her, while Korone greets her new junior, pleased to be working together. Amami Yuito, Chloe, Korone and another companion share a cheerful moment together at a table. A large figure questions Lintvium about her presence, but she only offers an amused smile in return. Ekres remarks that a day comes when one must leave the nest. He greets Lintvium, whom he calls Reidu, noting that it has been a while since they last met. Ekres observes that Lintvium seems to be under the care of the otherworldly traveler, and asks about him. Lintvium warns Ekres to keep his nose out of it, threatening to push him away if he meddles with Amami's plans. Ekres laughs and agrees to back down, contrasting his pacifistic nature with her dragon clan. Lintvium directly questions Ekres's intentions for getting close to Yuito-san and his companions. Ekres tells her not to misunderstand, claiming that for now he is nothing more than a simple grandpa. Lintvium declares she will find out if he has any ulterior motives, trusting in the honest hearts of men. Ekres counters, asking if Amami isn't already protected by the finest guards. The masked figure admits to Lintvium that Ekres may have sensed his ill will, and that he was alarmed by him. He concludes that he would certainly never want to make an enemy of the elder, and asks Lintvium if she agrees. Lintvium admits that she cannot deny his assessment. Lintvium asks the Guardian about his meeting with Grandpa. The Guardian reveals that while he first thought Ekres might be a cog in a larger political scheme, he now sees that is not the case. Ekres says he will take her up on her kindness and bear with the shame for the time being. Lintvium says she will believe his words for now, calling him by his full name Redulesti as she departs. Ekres watches her go, thinking to himself that the lintworm has shown her back to him. Ekres walks through the glowing forest. He reflects that tonight, they gained possibilities they never knew, and there is no need to taint the beautiful night with blood. With nimble fingers, the person pulls the twine taut. The knot is pulled tight with a final tug. Korone identifies the knot as a two-handed ligature and praises Chloe's skill, while Chloe humbly asks for her senior's approval. A comparison shows the difference between Korone's and Chloe's completed knots. Chloe admits she needs more practice and mentions getting more twine from Rimsan, which piques Korone's curiosity. A young boy pops his head in, responding to his name being called. The boy shows them a box full of needles with thread, explaining it's a new item the master made. He proudly explains that he and the others built the box late at night when construction work had stopped. A girl with pigtails chimes in that she made the strings and asks if she did a good job. Korone is amazed by everyone's contribution. Korone gratefully accepts the box of needles in her master's place. Chloe wonders where Dr. Amami is at the moment. Korone has a sudden realization about his whereabouts. Looking up, they see something amazing in the distance. Amami stands with a group, proudly presenting the newly constructed hospital as a wonder of his creations. One of the builders explains he only builds what Doc specifies, while another questions if such a grand structure is necessary. One of the builders tells the doctor they are also making a room he called a lecture hall. Amami explains it's a lecture hall for public lessons whenever the need arises. He states that because medical science is held up by three main pillars, he thinks the hall will be very useful in the future. Amami explains that the first pillar is practice, which covers patient treatment, while the other two are research and education. He continues that research involves finding sustainable ways to treat the many species that exist in their world. He gives an example, recalling how he recently had to rely solely on Shia's experience with ether. Amami states his goal to one day properly determine and record the required quantities of ether for all individuals. An elven woman agrees that this would require detailed research of the world tree's leaves. Another elf points out that his tools and supplies are running out and asks what he plans to do. Amami admits that while he gets tools and supplies from Boss Normim and Alec, it won't be a sustainable solution in the long run. Therefore, he will investigate every species to find out which tools they can provide, which also falls under the pillar of research. Alec points out that this sounds like too much work, reminding him he hasn't even finished the soap yet. Amami brushes off her concern and moves on to the final pillar, education. Amami explains that since he cannot do everything on his own, he wants to teach as many people as possible the knowledge he has, including practice and research. To make that happen, he says he will be relying on the boss to build the lecture hall. An instructor begins his lecture, declaring that class is now in session. The instructor explains to his students that they must make use of the 4 examinations when practicing healing magic. He calls on Deacon Peel, who correctly answers that the examinations are seeing, hearing, asking, and touching. The instructor prepares to demonstrate the most typical type of touching examination. He begins the abdominal examination, and the patient grunts. The instructor notes the weakened stomach and the sloshing water, indicating a common curse. He calls on Deacon Quinnin, telling him to speak up if he knows something. Deacon Peel believes there are many cases where tooth marks are left on the tongue. Deacon Quinnin asks for clarification, confirming if a sloshy stomach is caused by tooth marks on the tongue. The instructor affirms that he is correct. Deacon Peel opens his mouth, revealing the tooth marks on his tongue. The instructor declares that Deacon Quinnin is correct. The class applauds Deacon Quinnin's excellent knowledge. The instructor asks Deacon Peel if his body has been swollen lately. Deacon Peel confirms that recently his stomach has been bloated. The instructor explains that the curse causes water to congest in the body and advises the patient to rest his stomach. He passionately explains that this shows how curses manifest in different locations with different symptoms and that their examinations allow them to correctly deal with the evil spirits. The students shout their agreement in unison. The students call out to Bishop Saul as they leave. Deacon Quinnin approaches Bishop Saul and asks if he may ask a question. Quinnin asks what he should do if a patient's stomach is much more swollen than Deacon Peel's, as the examination would likely feel different. Bishop Saul praises him for the good question, acknowledging that the curse's individuality would appear more strongly. Bishop Saul explains that they would examine the patient by having them bend their knees or lying down to relax their abdominal stress. Quinnin is surprised, stating that he has never heard of such a method for examining evil spirits from other bishops. Bishop Saul tells him that for more specifics, he should ask Archbishop Eccles, whose insights are very unique. Quinnin thanks him very much for the advice. As Bishop Saul is leaving, a man calls out to him. The man, Comet, tells Saul that the role of a teacher seems to suit him well. Saul replies that they have no choice, as Archbishop Eccles's investigations bring results that are far detached from the conventional. Comet complains about politics but acknowledges that Eccles hasn't caused too much friction with the higher-ups. He recalls that the 2 who went with Zess were transferred to keep their archbishop under surveillance. Saul remarks that for Zess's standards, he's late to return, and it would be good if there were no unnecessary problems. Comet confidently states that Zess would never mess this up. A man observes the bustling town, noting that the country has certainly changed for the better, and wonders if it is because of Amami. A group of children happily call out to the man. An associate asks Zess if it is almost time and if everything is set up. Zess, who is addressed as Costa, is asked if the 5 hooded figures are his henchmen. Costa confirms they are dark elf mercenaries and assures his associate that their entry records have been cleared. A massive explosion rocks the area where the group is standing. Costa, now masked, gives his orders: rescue or execute Culnelson and capture the dangerous fake healer. Lintvium watches the fire, deducing it is not an attack from the country of the night, just as an order to begin the operation is given. On the ground, people panic, shouting about the huge fire and the sudden sound. A large dragon appears, and someone instructs Amami to go to the castle and take the injured with him. Alec shouts that he will go. An old man realizes the sound was not fire magic but a bomb, and warns there could be more. The Elven Queen instructs Mai to relay information about the explosives to the Elven guards for disaster relief. The small creature tugs on Amami's clothes, getting his attention. Amami asks the creature if it would use its water to extinguish the fire. Startled by the creature's actions, Amami asks what is wrong. The group quickly coordinates, deciding that Amami and Shia will go to the castle, while the old man stays to protect the hospital. The dragon continues to fight the fire, as someone reports that the neighborhood has been evacuated. The dragon unleashes a powerful attack on the flames. The fire continues to spread, much to the dragon's frustration. The dragon clicks its tongue in annoyance. In his human form, the man realizes he can't use enough power, but transforming into a dragon would destroy the surroundings. He realizes he needs to destroy the fire quickly, but it won't go out. He is surprised as he feels rain begin to fall. A massive torrent of water splashes down, dousing the flames. The onlookers are amazed that the fire went out in an instant, while the Dragon Man simply says HMPH. A winged lion flies over the doused flames, and the Dragon Man praises the Elder's excellent work. He orders his subordinate to check for injured people, but is told there shouldn't be any residences there, leaving him to wonder why a fire erupted in that spot. A second explosion occurs, catching them by surprise. Alec cries out that a second one has occurred, and that it's from the castle. A pig-like man emerges from the smoke and greets them. The pig man recognizes the disheveled man as Holy Priest Culnelson. Culnelson demands to know what happened and who his attackers are, insisting they be more courteous. Hooded figures surround the startled priest. An elven guard arrives, demanding to know what the group is doing. The pig man grins menacingly. Amami and his companions run towards the commotion, realizing there was an explosion at the castle. They stop abruptly as their path is blocked. Costa stands before them, introducing himself to Princess Yuno and Deacon Saya. He then addresses Amami directly, calling him the fraud. Two men, one with a sack over his head, inform a prisoner that they have come to bring him back. A young guard furiously confronts them, shouting that they cannot abduct a prisoner. The sack-headed man crushes something in his hand, which begins to crackle with energy. Several dark orbs land on the floor with a clang. The guard looks on in horror as he realizes what the objects are. A massive explosion erupts, throwing figures through the air. The bearded accomplice is caught in the blast, recoiling in shock. A man in glasses appears from the rustling foliage, surprising Costa and asking who he works for. The man expresses his interest in Costa's allies, who use bombs instead of magic. Costa, surprised by the man's courteous tone, speculates that the church now considers him a burden to be eliminated. The man in glasses confirms Costa's suspicion that he is not affiliated with the church. Costa's expression twists into a wide, maniacal grin. The man reveals his true intention, stating he looks forward to working with Holy Priest Culnelson. Amami Yuito commends Korone on her practice, and she expresses her satisfaction with her improvement. He tells her that soon he'll be able to entrust her with ligature on actual patients. Korone feels it might be too early for her, but Amami insists she should get used to real operations as soon as possible. He reminds her that situations may arise like with Hugh-kun, where he will be unable to act or even be present. Korone listens with a serious expression, understanding the weight of his words. Amami tells Korone he wants her to do as much as she can, promising to be there to help with things she can't predict. Filled with determination, Korone eagerly accepts the challenge. A young elven woman traveling with Amami asks the stranger to please move aside. The masked figure notes that she is clearly of noble birth. The figure states ominously that this time is different. The girl with the staff asks if they have come from the human country, begging them to leave. She explains that her people do not wish to cause trouble and only want to live in good health. The masked figure claims to have no idea what she means by human country. He remarks that ideals are often out of touch with reality. The girl insists that despite that, they should still strive to bring their ideals to fruition. The figure dismisses her retort as meaningless poppycock. A hooded figure attacks with a bladed weapon. The attack is blocked, creating a flash of impact. The force of the blocked attack sends a shockwave through the area, knocking the defenders back. The hooded assailant continues their furious assault. They swing their weapon with incredible speed and force. The young woman with the ponytail nimbly dodges a powerful sweeping attack. The hooded attacker looks on in surprise. The girl with the ponytail unleashes a magical counterattack. One of the attackers, a dark-skinned elf, is taken aback by the retaliation. The girl with the ponytail identifies her opponent as a dark elf. Amami screams a warning to Yuno-san. A second dark elf attacks Yuno from behind, calling her a pest. The first dark elf continues her attack from the front. Yuno grunts in pain as the attack lands, wounding her arm. Amami and the girl with the staff look on in horror. The dark elves press their attack. Amami expresses his concern for Yuno's arm, but she tells him she's fine and that he should escape quickly. Yuno realizes their aim is to capture or eliminate her, and vows to buy time for their escape. One of the dark elves notes that the previous attack was too shallow, while the other reminds her not to drop her blade. One of them lunges forward in another powerful attack. Amami looks on in terror. The girl with the staff also watches, horrified. Yuno glares defiantly at her opponents. The two dark elves are taken aback by her resolve. The dark elves are shocked to see two dragons approaching from the sky. A fierce, chimeric creature roars, demanding to know who they are. The lead dark elf wonders how they could have already put out the fire. The lead dark elf announces that they are pulling out, as they cannot fulfill their objective. Her companion questions the decision, pointing out they haven't finished their task. The leader explains that it would be too troublesome if the princess got to the castle, and they can finish the job later. The dark elves tell the group they are lucky, and that they will be heading home. They quickly depart. Amami and his companions are left stunned and shaken. As they retreat, one of the dark elves throws a bomb back at the group. The bomb sails through the air towards them. The fuse on the bomb sparks, ready to detonate. Amami watches in horror, realizing what the blast will do. The bomb explodes with tremendous force. A creature cries out Amami's name in a panic. The force of the explosion engulfs the group. Amami, Yuno, and the girl with the staff struggle to maintain a magical shield against the blast. Debris is sent flying in all directions. Amami lies motionless on the ground, seriously injured from the explosion, as a companion screams his name. Coronet and Chloe arrive, alerted by the commotion. The girl with the staff cries out that Amami-sama is hurt. Amami tells Yuno her arm is more important, but Alec intervenes, reminding them of triage and stating Amami is in worse condition. Yuno cries, apologizing that she couldn't protect him. Alec tells Yuno that it's not her fault. Coronet calls out to her master, Amami, who apologizes for his wound. He asks Coronet if he can leave his treatment to her. Coronet is shocked by his request. Amami confirms, leaving both his and Yuno's treatment in her hands. With grim determination, Coronet accepts, vowing that she'll do it. Coronet and Chloe stand ready in surgical uniforms made by Rim. A close-up shows the piece of shrapnel lodged in Amami's shoulder. Coronet directs Chloe, telling her the tools are laid out in order and to hand them to her when asked. Chloe nervously agrees. Coronet announces that the surgery to remove the ferric debris from her master's shoulder will now begin. The man in glasses notes that Costa seems to have reaped no harvest. The masked figure appears, and the man remarks that it looks like she succeeded. Costa looks on with a wary expression. The masked figure reports that with pissed-off dragons searching for them, their objective is unobtainable, but collecting that man is enough. She announces her intention to return to the papacy and demands Costa hand over the prisoner. The man in glasses, addressed as Mr. smiles slyly. The man in glasses grins, stating that while he feels bad, he has a prior contract. Costa understands the implication, retorting that the mastermind is going to have to die here. Chloe offers words of encouragement and thanks to her senior, Coronet. Sweat drips down Coronet's brow as she concentrates on the delicate procedure. Coronet announces that she is disinfecting the wound before proceeding. Chloe watches her mentor, her expression a mixture of awe and anxiety. Coronet carefully wipes the area, her mind racing with the need to succeed. Amami's words of trust echo in her memory. With renewed resolve, Coronet focuses, determined not to fail her master. Chloe hands Coronet the next required instrument, earning a word of thanks for her foresight. She readies a syringe of lidocaine for the first injection. She carefully targets the area around the wound for the injection. Coronet gently warns Amami that he might feel a sting. The needle goes in, causing the patient to flinch. Coronet is momentarily startled by his reaction. Amami grunts from the sharp sting of the injection. Filled with concern, she immediately asks if her master is okay. From off-panel, Amami tells Coronet that he is okay and thanks her. Coronet breathes a sigh of relief, her tension easing slightly. Hoping the anesthetic is effective, she announces they will now remove the shrapnel. She selects the appropriate tool for the extraction, straight pain forceps. With intense focus, she commands herself to pull the shrapnel out. The foreign object is slowly extracted from the wound. The onlooking catgirl, Coronet's other self, watches in horror. The surgeon Coronet's eyes widen in fear as she performs the extraction. Coronet panics, fearing her master will bleed out if she continues. Amami calmly reassures her that he will be fine as long as she stays composed. With renewed determination, Coronet prepares to try again. She gets a firm grip on the shrapnel with her forceps. She pulls firmly, dragging the object through the tissue. She cries out in surprise and relief as the shrapnel finally budges. Korone asks Amami if he feels any pain, and he confirms the anesthetic is working. Relieved, she declares she will continue with the extraction. She continues to carefully tug and drag the shrapnel out. The shrapnel is finally extracted from the wound. Korone announces with relief that the object is out. She inspects the wound, noting that the bleeding is minimal. Korone asks Chloe for the second needle to wash the wound. She recalls a past lesson from Amami about how to properly wash a wound. Amami had explained that saline solution from a syringe is best for most cases. She begins to flush the wound with the saline solution. The cleaned wound is dried with a piece of sterile gauze. Korone prepares to suture, asking her assistant for the needle holder and thread. Chloe hands her the tool and asks for the next instruction. Chloe presents the tray with the needles and thread. Korone fumbles with the slippery needle, struggling to get a grip. As Korone struggles, Chloe offers words of encouragement. Finally, she successfully grasps the needle with the holder. Her eyes are filled with intense concentration. She carefully determines the placement for the first stitch. She decides on the entry point for the needle. With a pop, the needle pierces the skin and emerges on the other side. Korone tells herself to perform the knot just as she practiced. She spins the thread around the instrument to form the knot. She pulls the thread through to create the first loop of the knot. She pulls the thread, tightening the surgical knot. The stitch is squeezed tightly, closing the skin. She adds another knot to secure the stitch. Korone instructs Chloe to grab the Cooper scissors to cut the thread. Chloe promptly acknowledges the command. The excess thread is snipped away with the scissors. The first stitch is complete. Korone announces she will continue suturing with the next needle. The two continue the suturing process with focused determination. With the wound fully sutured, Korone declares the surgery complete. Amami weakly calls out to Korone. She immediately rushes to his side, asking if he is all right. Amami sincerely thanks Korone, telling her she saved him. Her eyes fill with tears upon hearing his words of gratitude. Overwhelmed with emotion, she closes her eyes, letting the tears of relief fall. Overcome with relief, Korone weeps, glad that the surgery was a success. The narrator confirms the surgery is complete as a vision of a happy Amami and Korone appears. The man in glasses comments on Alec's arrogant tone. Alec demands to know who set the man up to this, suspecting someone named Sislarp. The man smirks, revealing he's been investigating the 6 stars. Alec silences him, but the man begins to speak of his real employer. The man, identified as Your Highness Kanan, expresses frustration at the interruption, realizing he must now kill his target. Kanan states that killing needs no justification, as the outcome is the same. Her cold-blooded statement shocks the men, but she only laughs. Alec connects the dots, realizing the dark elves and bombs were all a diversion for the Demon King. Kanan shrieks the order to kill Alec with magic. Her 2 subordinates immediately launch a magical attack. Alec is forced to evade the powerful assault. Alec knows he must get away with the information he has learned. He creates a powerful explosion to cover his escape. The elves are caught in the chaotic aftermath of the explosion. Alec uses the opportunity to make his escape through the forest. One of the pursuing elves grunts in pain as she's hit by debris. Kanan spots Alec and orders her subordinates to give chase. The injured elf grits her teeth, fighting through the pain. She unleashes a powerful burst of magic. She uses a magical charm to heal her injury and overcome the venom. One of the elves points out a light, identifying it as their target. Kanan notes that Alec is healing on the run, calling humans a pain. She believes that ultimately he cannot match a dark elf's physical prowess. Alec finds a patch of tall grass and decides to hide within it. Having lost their target, the elves ask Kanan for their next move. Kanan asks one of her subordinates if she has used a particular technique yet. One of the elves launches an attack into the tall grass. Alec recognizes the sound of the incoming attack with dread. The attack hits him, forcing him from his cover. A massive dark explosion erupts from the field. The blast incinerates the tall grass where Alec was hiding. Alec groans in pain, caught in the aftermath of the explosion. One of the elves confirms that their target was indeed in the blast radius. Kanan approaches the downed Alec, drawing her sword. Kanan strikes Alec with a powerful blow. The battle rages fiercely within the scorched grass. Alec tries to cast a spell to defend himself. He's struck again before he can complete the incantation. He cries out in pain from the relentless assault. One of the subordinate elves watches the brutal assault. Kanan continues her ferocious attack on the downed Alec. Alec is struck by another powerful, incapacitating blow. Smoke rises from the site of the one-sided battle. Alec lies motionless and defeated. Victorious, Kanan tosses her defeated foe's staff aside. Kanan considers delivering the final blow. Alec desperately clings to consciousness, refusing to give up. A voice from off-panel shouts that they've been found. The newly arrived group spots the Dark Elves and calls for reinforcements. Kanan is surprised that forces from the World Tree are already there. Ekres decides to leave Alec to his fate, confident he won't survive his injuries. A new figure appears, pleased that her plan worked out well. The woman Mio crouches over the defeated Alec, telling him she has come for him. Mio uses her magic, thankful to have found Alec, recalling that resonating magic jewels are drawn to one another. She remembers how her group exchanged their jewels so they could find each other if anything were to happen. The tingling from her staff and the jewel led her straight to Alec's location. Having dragged him through the woods, she apologizes to her waiting mount Gnarl for the delay. Mio informs the unconscious Alec that she will borrow his jewel again, certain that their companion Comet has already caught on. She carefully lifts Alec onto her mount. As he starts to slip, she catches him, worried about his condition. Riding away, Mio tells Alec that she has already healed his wounds. She looks at his face, wondering why he still has not regained consciousness. On a high balcony, a man wonders about the purpose of a full roll call. Another member of the group simply answers with the name Comet. Sensing his jewel has been activated, an enraged Comet realizes Mio has used it. The others look on in shock at his sudden realization. Comet confirms that something has happened to Zess. Comet declares his intent to go to the World Tree, having just come to inform them. Arch tries to stop him, telling him to calm down and wait for instructions from Sama. Comet retorts that Arch should calm down too. Sol vows to join the fight, prompting thanks from Arch. Comet kicks a wall in frustration, yelling that there is no way he can be calm. Watching him leave, Arch notes that she's never seen him this mad. She muses that precocious types like him, who often vent to them, are the easiest to upset. Arch explains that she heard from Mio that Comet was incredibly angry back then as well. Her companion questions when back then was. She specifies it was during the Barony homicide incident. 10 years prior, townspeople watch as a young Comet walks by, identifying him as part of Reverend Eccles's group. One of the students claims he heard the bishop is a money grubber, and that is how his family has power. He cruelly suggests that Comet is only at the academy because his parents hoarded money. Comet overhears their taunts but continues to walk past them. A young Sol unleashes a jolt of magic, knocking the bullies off their feet. Comet looks back in surprise at the sudden intervention. Sol calls their behavior disgraceful and tells them to stop. The bullies tell Sol to stop shouting and quickly leave. Sol apologizes to Comet for chasing them away. Comet thinks to himself that Sol is a thoughtless person because he himself does not have parents. Sol calls out to Arch as he and Comet enter a study room. Arch greets him in return. She explains that Sama is not coming, so they will have to study by themselves. Comet complains that their teacher is neglecting them, while Arch admits she does not know why he is absent. Comet asks where the others are, wondering if Arch is the only one studying seriously. Arch replies that Coronet ran off to do experiments in the courtyard. Chloe spots Coronet with gunpowder in the courtyard and tells her to stop. She reminds Coronet that her last experiment caused a fire and earned a warning from Mr. Eccles, but Coronet plays dumb. Coronet claims to have used magic by mistake and tells Chloe to run, but Chloe yells that she's just acting. An explosion sends both girls flying. Sol rushes to the scene demanding to know what they are doing, while Arch watches thoughtfully from a distance. Arch explains that the girls were apparently researching ways to amplify magic's effectiveness. Comet spots Zess in a tree and asks what he's doing up there. Zess replies that Reverend Eccles told him to stop Coronet's experiments if they got too dangerous. Comet asks why he did not stop them, and Zess replies that he judged the experiment posed no serious threat. Zess then tells Comet he was given another message. He presents a sealed letter, explaining it is a written request from the bishop, which he believes is a challenge letter. Zess adds that Eccles told him that Comet should be able to judge the situation correctly. They arrive at the barony's huge mansion. Chloe reminds Coronet that they are not there to mess around. Comet wonders why he and Coronet were sent on this mission, as he can barely handle her experiments in the courtyard. A guard confronts the two of them, demanding to know who they are and what their business is. At the scene of a suspected murder, the investigation begins. Countess Flaunia demands to know what is happening, while Comet states his intent to ask some questions to clear up uncertainties. Baron Glucken angrily objects, wanting to go home since the examination is supposedly finished. Comet calmly replies that they also wish to conclude the matter quickly. Comet begins his interrogation, asking if the deceased, Lady Misery, had ever suffered any large injuries. Baron Glucken admits she sustained some during her time with the church, but claims they had fully healed. The Countess adds that her sister, being from a Count's family, had no such injuries in her childhood. Comet acknowledges their answers. He prepares his next question. The gathered nobles are scandalized when Comet asks about Lady Misery's menstrual cycle. A maid named Hennet steps forward, explaining that she assisted the lady and confirms that her mistress had already stopped menstruating. The Baron's patience wears thin, and he demands to know the point of the interrogation. Unfazed, Comet announces he has one last question. The interrogation is interrupted by a man named Lawrence. He announces the arrival of a special permit, number 42. Comet and Captain Ostea are shocked by the news. Captain Ostea expresses his surprise at how quickly the permit was delivered. Lawrence explains that Reverend Eccles had given them the permit beforehand, anticipating it would be needed. Mia, watching from the side, is filled with admiration, thinking that her teacher truly knows everything. Mia quietly praises Comet, who seems irritated, muttering that Zess had it all wrong. He feels that Zess is too overprotective and that this wasn't a real challenge. The maid Hennet frantically denies any involvement. As the Countess questions their certainty, Hennet insists on her innocence. The Countess turns on Hennet, pointing out that she was the first to find her dead sister, which is suspicious. Hennet argues that she was within the county at the time, but the Countess retorts that she has no alibi. The Countess coldly states that it's common sense to suspect her. Hennet desperately defends herself, insisting she had no motive to harm the madam. To prove her innocence, Hennet explains that Lady Misery was recently sending gifts to the county at her sister's request, often sighing about the trouble it caused. The Countess wonders what this has to do with the situation. The Baron seizes on this, twisting it into an accusation that Hennet and the madam were in a dispute over the matter. The Countess speaks up, defending Hennet. She reveals that Misery herself had put her husband, Hennet, in charge of the county's deliveries and stock. The Countess implies this is why he is taking the Baroness's side, as Misery was troubled by the state of her goods. The Countess declares that the one truly at odds with his wife would be the man in charge of her goods. Flustered, the man denies it. Captain Ostea tries to calm the situation. Comet cuts in, stating that their argument has been helpful and that he is ready to ask his final question. For his final question, Comet asks which of the people who came close to the deceased is able to use healing magic. Captain Ostea confirms that the Secret Service, being affiliated with the papacy, cannot use it. The implication hangs in the air, and Baron Glucken looks up in dawning horror. With all other possibilities eliminated, Comet levels his accusation at Baron Glucken. As the crowd reels in shock, Comet points directly at the Baron, naming him the culprit. The Baron scoffs, finding it preposterous that he's the culprit simply because he can use healing magic. Captain Ostea asks Comet for an explanation. Comet instead instructs Mio to insert another needle into the body. Enraged, the Baron forbids them from desecrating his wife's remains any further and orders Captain Ostea to stop the children. Comet presents the special permit. He declares that in the name of His Holiness, the Pope, it authorizes an autopsy that would otherwise be forbidden. Mio inserts the second needle into the body. She reports that it meets the same resistance as the first time, as if something like muscle is blocking it from reaching the back. She wonders aloud what could be happening under the skin where the needles are placed. Mio presses the needle deeper. She withdraws it and dark blood drips from its tip onto a cloth. The Baron laughs, stating the obvious, of course someone would bleed if stabbed with a needle. Comet, however, remains serious. In a shocking move, Comet plunges his own hand deep into the corpse's abdomen. The onlookers are horrified by his action. He tells the Baron that his feigned ignorance is getting old and that he will now explain everything very simply. Comet presents a needle to Captain Astaire. The captain inspects it closely. He acknowledges that while there is some blood on it, there is no blood stored inside the hollow needle. Mio thinks about how cool Comet is, though she finds his methods a bit extreme. Comet remains focused, his expression grim and determined. Comet thanks Mio, admitting he got carried away dealing with the adults. Captain Astaire declares that everything should be clear now, as Comet explains the key finding: the muscles in Lady Misery's abdomen are completely torn up and bloody. One of the men asks why her abdomen is in such a state. Comet reveals that Lady Misery was stabbed in the stomach with a knife and bled to death, meaning her death was not from natural causes. He explains that the condition of her abdomen and the lack of discoloration on her back reveal the truth. The Baron healed the skin to hide the external wound. Comet challenges the Baron, stating that this is a crime only he could commit and daring him to prove his innocence. Overwhelmed by the evidence, the Baron collapses to the floor. The onlookers demand to know why he did such a thing. Comet grimly suggests the motive was likely a common one: money. The Baron confesses that as the lowest rank in the hierarchy, his position was weak. He explains that his house's economy was in dire straits, and his title was at risk of being revoked. And yet, no matter how many times he told her, Misery kept spending all their funds on the county and merchants. The Baron reveals his dream was to become a magician, but the county forced him to marry Misery and return to secular life. He likens his situation to that of the children present. He sobs that his money and dreams were stolen and trampled upon, and that is why he did it. Comet looks on with a pained expression. A painful memory surfaces for Comet of a woman blaming him for a customer leaving. He remembers her cruelly stating that she wished he had never been born. Comet tells the Baron his tears are disgusting. He shouts that coming clean doesn't equate to remorse. The Baron simply did what he wanted. Comet furiously declares that while he doesn't care about the Baron's petty revenge story, he will not forgive anyone who harms those close to him. As Mia watches with concern, Comet calls the Baron a criminal with no right to cry. The Countess reveals that Misery had noticed his regret and knew about the magic jewel he still wore. In secret, she had been lobbying the papacy for his return to his former life. The Countess explains that she was telling him this for the dignity of her sister, revealing that she had been helping lobby the papacy on his behalf. Utterly broken by this revelation, the Baron can only scream his wife's name in anguish. Suddenly, Comet stomps his foot. He grabs Mio, taking her hostage, and the others cry out in alarm. Driven mad by grief, the Baron screams that he will escape to find the happiness he deserves and demands that everyone throw down their weapons. The Baron threatens to stab Mio as he holds her. Captain Astaire gestures for his men to stand down. Comet reluctantly drops his staff. As the Baron moves to strike, Mio's own staff begins to glow with protective magic. Reacting quickly, Mio strikes the Baron with her glowing staff. Comet simultaneously grabs the Baron's weapon, disarming him. Comet unleashes a powerful blast of magic. The blast is directed at the Baron. He is sent flying across the room in a massive explosion. The Baron is overwhelmed by the attack. The other members of the 6 Stars suddenly arrive, their own magic flaring as they stand ready to support their friends. The combined magical power erupts, shattering the balcony. The Baron is left defeated on the floor. Comet stands protectively, his staff held firm. Captain Astaire instructs his subordinate, Lawrence, to take care of the rest. He thanks Comet for his help before preparing to leave. Comet dismisses the question, saying he just came because he was requested to. Out of curiosity, he asks about Comet's unusual examination method. Captain Astaire explains that in his experience, examinations simply involve casting healing magic, and if that fails, the person is deemed dead. He notes that Comet's examination wasn't like that at all. He acknowledges that this method helped wrap up the case easily, and asks why he does things differently. Comet simply replies that he doesn't know, he's just doing what his teacher taught him. With a wave, he bids Captain Astaire farewell. As the captain walks away, he muses on the mysterious nature of Eccles and the impressive knowledge and ability of Comet, despite his youth, finding the situation increasingly interesting. One of the 6 Stars notes Mio's disheveled hair, suggesting they fix it at home. Mio jokes about making an earring from it to remember the day. Comet asks why they all came. Another member explains that Mr. Eccles sent them to check up on him, and Mio after learning they had used the special permit. Comet grumbles again about their overprotective teacher. Arch teases Comet for not being upfront about his feelings, saying it's okay to be happy they came. A flustered Comet tells her to be quiet. The Countess approaches to express her deepest gratitude for their help regarding her sister and Glucan. Later, one of the 6 stars makes a proposal. He points out that while Eccles warned them of the danger this time, they can't always rely on him. He suggests they should exchange their magic jewels with each other. Comet confirms the idea is for them each to hold someone else's jewel. The boy explains that way, if something happens to one of them, the person holding their stone will know immediately. The boy explains that a crystallized magic jewel resonates with its owner, allowing them to sense each other's condition even from far away. The group enthusiastically agrees to the plan, and Comet confirms he is on board as they prepare to take an oath. One of the boys declares that they are only the 6 stars when all 6 of them are together, vowing that they will never lose each other. The group cheers in agreement, and Comet thinks that he truly sees them as his family. Looking at his friends, Comet smiles. Word of their success spreads, with students gossiping about how one of them solved a major murder case. They marvel at how insane the 6 stars are, discussing the details of the case. One student listens with envy, muttering that it's a huge achievement. The envious student is startled by the arrival of an imposing horned figure wearing glasses, whom he greets as His Grace, Archbishop Sisler. The Archbishop addresses the student as Culnelson and announces that he will evaluate him. He offers the boy power, telling him to stay strong under his wing and promising not to harm him. It's reported that a man was secured from the World Tree. A shadowy figure looks down at the captive, identifying him as the healing magician. A large horned figure sits upon a throne, flanked by an advisor. He looks down at the captive healing magician and beckons him closer, promising that he will not be harmed. Amami Yuito lies unconscious in bed, watched over by a worried Korone, a pensive Alec, and a stoic Chloe. Korone listens intently with her stethoscope. The young elf patient Hike looks up nervously as Korone examines him. A captain asks Korone for an update on Hike's condition. Korone explains that while he seems stable for now, she will have her master take a look later since she is still an apprentice. Hike's companions are overjoyed and thank him profusely. A guilt-ridden Hike apologizes to his captain, blaming himself for letting their targets escape. The captain listens with a stern expression. Korone observes their conversation. The captain tells Hike not to fret, reminding him that the enemy had explosives and they were outnumbered. He encourages Hike to improve so that he will be victorious in their next encounter. Hike looks on with determination. Hike yells, "Yes, sir," with renewed vigor. Korone looks on, deeply moved, and thinks to herself that she must also improve. Shia sits patiently, holding a staff. Amami stirs in his sleep. He mutters something indistinctly. Shia's eyes widen in surprise. She turns and shouts for Korone, announcing that Amami is waking up. Amami wakes with a start, shouting that he overslept. Lintvium and Alec are surprised and call out his name. Korone is overcome with emotion, crying tears of joy. The group joyfully surrounds Amami, shouting his name with relief. Amami smiles and apologizes for making them all worry. Alec explains that he has been unconscious ever since he got a fever. Korone feels guilty, thinking she did not use enough magic. Amami gives Korone a big, appreciative smile, thanking her for a great job. Korone gets flustered by the praise. Korone asks if he also looked at Yuno's arm, urging him to check while he can. Amami looks confused and asks about Shia. Korone explains Shia's role in his recovery. Amami is shocked to realize magic was used on him the whole time. He looks at his stitched shoulder, amazed that it is not infected at all. He turns to thank Shia. Shia bashfully says she did not do much. Korone clarifies that Chloe was the one who kept watch all night. Amami looks around for Chloe, who announces her presence. Amami thanks Chloe, who apologizes for appearing from the ceiling to avoid the sunlight. Chloe explains that since the night belongs to vampires, she saw it as the best way to repay him, even though she could not contribute much during the operation. Alec chimes in, revealing that she and the Prince of Dragons also kept watch. Amami is moved to tears. He bows his head, thanking everyone again. Alec shouts at him to rest until he is fully healed. Chloe offers to use a secret vampire technique, piquing Lintvium's interest. The Dragon Prince asks his mother what she means, and she gives her approval to the princess. Lintvium agrees. Chloe explains that the special magic is used by vampires to retrieve blood from their prey without detection. A wave of magic shoots from Chloe towards Amami. Amami is shocked by the result. He exclaims that the pain is gone, while Alec wonders if it is like ether. Chloe explains she got the idea from the local anesthetic Coronet had used. Amami is amazed, thinking about the potential of such magic. Coronet looks at Amami with a serious expression. She calls out to her master. She explains that she was glad to have pulled through the operation he left in her hands, but at the same time, she was incredibly scared and anxious. Coronet declares with resolve that she wants to learn more and gain experience to overcome her fear. She earnestly asks Amami to teach her as much as possible. Amami beams and says, "Of course." Alec tells a newcomer that this is not a competition, while Lintvium looks on. A boisterous man announces that the dock is awake. More disembodied voices of well-wishers fill the air. The lion-like creature lets out a happy growl. A view of a remote, rocky island. A surgeon's focused eyes are seen above a surgical mask. The surgeon holds a scalpel. A severed appendix is placed in a surgical tray. A worried man jumps up as Dr. Okusawa appears, asking about his son's condition. Okusawa smiles, announcing the successful surgery and that the boy is resting. The young boy sleeps soundly in his bed. The father shakes the doctor's hand vigorously, calling him a messiah. The doctor asks if the man is free that weekend. The man confirms he has no plans. Okusawa asks him to look after his son and the clinic, as he has fieldwork. A view of the sea from the island. Okusawa looks determined as he walks. He walks down a path into the jungle. He approaches a stone structure overgrown with plants. Kaguya finds Kurowa in the waiting room and asks if he is hurt, but Kurowa says the doctor is out. Kaguya asks if Kurowa's son is feeling better, and Kurowa praises the young doctor. Kaguya explains he brought a drink, but sees the doctor is out looking for the missing Dr. Amami. Kurowa worries about the doctor's health, mentioning he said something about fieldwork. Okusawa takes notes on his phone while being told about the second two. He is told that these statues are placed at the end of winding roads to ward off evil spirits, and he notes that the road is converging here. The person on the phone explains their purpose is to protect the island from evils coming from the heavens. Okusawa asks if the protection extends to lightning. Natsume-san thanks him for tagging along, but Okusawa says he was interested in the island's folklore from the start. Natsume-san, sitting in a library, says he is looking into the legends of spiriting away on the island. Okusawa thanks Natsume and tells him not to mind. Natsume asks him to find an abandoned shrine. He apologizes for the vague description, but assures him it will be worth the search. Okusawa's boot squelches in the mud. He questions the path while batting away insects. Natsume brings up the topic of Reihoshin, which are the opposite of spiriting away. Natsume lists various Reihoshin from different regions of Japan. He explains that Bose is actually a god who appears on the last day of Aben. He describes how they use red mud to cleanse people, prompting Okusawa to compare them to a spirit doctor. Natsume says he sees Okusawa has arrived, as Okusawa stares in shock. A wide shot shows the enormous, empty stone pit. Natsume explains the scientific improbability of the event and asks about folklore connections. Okusawa, with a memory of Amami smiling, resolves to continue his search, unwilling to just sit and wait. A grand building is shown as someone notes Sir Eckard's tardiness. Eckard enters the massive library, addressing Lady Cupra with his news. Two other figures express their interest in the news. The man with heart-shaped glasses wonders aloud about the important news. Sir Sislurp is addressed. Sislurp asks if he remembers the priest who blundered at the elves. He clarifies that it is a priest from Eckard's faction. Eckard denies knowing, but then recalls hearing about Culnelson's failure. Sislurp points out that they are all Eckard's subordinates. Eckard accuses Sislurp of exaggeration and asks for proof of his claims. Sislurp says he does not mind as long as it brings down Eccles and mentions that dealing with Culnelson is just part of the news. Sislurp explains that a battle took place and the participants returned injured and unconscious. Lady Cupra reacts to the word battle. Sislurp expresses his satisfaction that the stuck-up 6 stars got a taste of their own medicine, but worries about the potential for war. Eckard dismisses the idea of war starting so easily. He grins, suggesting their boss should sacrifice himself to take responsibility. A narration mentions an apple overcoming venom. People surround a bed where someone lies injured. Zess's eyes open. Two men express their relief, thanking Eccles. Two girls also look on with relief. Eccles tells Zess to rest. A boy with short, light hair urgently asks Zess what happened at the World Tree. Zess's eyes are wide. He vaguely repeats the World Tree. Zess, looking confused, asks Comet what he is talking about. Comet is shocked. He angrily tells Zess to stop joking around. Zess still looks confused. The girl with the hook interjects, reminding Zess that she rescued him. Zess tells Mio he is sorry, but has no recollection of what she is describing. Eccles explains that it would not be unusual to have temporary amnesia after a heavy blow to the head. A medical definition of retrograde amnesia is provided. Comet tells Zess to rest up. A man tells Mio he will stay with Zess, and she agrees. Zess sits up in bed, looking troubled. Mio addresses Eccles as they leave the room. One of the group asks if Zess will be okay, and Eccles reassures them. Eccles says he would like to examine a wadjet if possible. A woman notes the challenge, as they would have to find and bring one to him. An older man points out that His Holiness retainer Hennet is a wadjet. A man wonders if they can get to him easily. Eccles says he will handle the wadjet, but they are still unsure about Zess's condition. The woman explains Zess was already overwhelmed by dark elves when Mio arrived. A man questions this, recalling that the dark elves and elves were not on good terms. Comet wonders where this is all going if it is not about the World Tree. The woman suggests the Cardinals group as a possible culprit. The group ponders the involvement of the Kavash faction. Comet argues against the theory, stating an ambush would have been better planned. Eccles agrees with Comet and tells them to think it through. He concludes that there must be a reason why Zess was specifically targeted at the World Tree. The group looks somber as one of them realizes what this means, and Eccles apologizes. Eccles's eyes are grim. A spiky-haired man stands at the end of the corridor, facing them. Tylon introduces himself to Archbishop Eccles. The Inquisitor's feet march forward in unison. Tylon stands at the head of his squadron, a confident smirk on his face. Tylon announces that Eccles is under suspicion of rebellion. Eccles's companions react with shock and anger. He formally places the stunned Archbishop under arrest. The history of the Church and its healing magic is a long and storied one. In an era when humans were oppressed, God granted them Clemenius, the man of origin, who founded the Church with his 10 disciples. Amidst the worldwide curse known as the Calamity, the Church used healing magic to repair relations between humanity and other races, establishing itself as a powerful institution. After the Calamity, the Church transformed and developed into the main organ of humanity, becoming powerful enough to be considered the center of the world. The title of Cardinal was first used to describe the leadership of Clemenius's 10 disciples. The current organization of the Church is a centralized body, with the Pope as its head and 10 cardinals below him. Positions within the Church hierarchy, from deacon to cardinal, were traditionally achievable only by sufficiently excellent individuals under the Pope's supervision. Yet in recent years, the role and selection process of cardinals have changed as factional politics and human affairs within the Church have steadily come under the spotlight. Archbishop Eccles faces a large, cloaked assembly in a grand hall. A long-haired man with glasses solemnly announces the beginning of the Inquisition. After Clemenius left the world to be with God, the Church was consecrated to carry on his prayer for eternity. With the power of the miracles left behind by the disciples, the Church shouldered the future of humanity. Meanwhile, missionary work to proselytize all social strata continued. As yet, the current era still shows a tendency to preserve the persecution and oppression between humanity and other races. For the longest time, humanity sought unity and harmony. To preserve harmony, the dogma of Clemenius dictated that anyone opposing the Church would be treated as a heathen and severely punished, leading to the formation of the Inquisition to oversee these trials. Answering directly to the Pope, the Inquisition normally couldn't include magicians, though there were exceptions. Cardinal Sislep identifies the powerful Kavash faction. His fellow Cardinal Echard listens intently. The third leader, Lady Cupra, looks on. These 3 cardinals are the leaders of the Kavash faction, which is the main propagator of the theory of anthropocentrism within the Church. While the Chalome faction has an open posture of harmony with other races, the Suimhatch faction is solely concerned with doctrine and legitimacy. In contrast, the Kavash faction is colored by many types of militarism, using various methods to control their followers. The Kavash faction's dealings are separated from their outward appearance, unlike the Inquisition, which is directly under the command of the Pope. Sislurp warns Eccles not to misunderstand. Sislurp states that the reason they called Eccles here is to protect the Church and humanity. Eccles retorts that he doesn't have much time to spare and implies they are jesting. A woman accompanying the cardinals steps forward to excuse herself. Selina stands her ground, blocking the magically glowing Eccles. She commands Archbishop Eccles to stand down, declaring that his withdrawal from an inquisition would be unprecedented. Sislurp tells Eccles that it's rude to accuse them of playing around, asking if he really thinks they would do such a thing. He then asks if Eccles is truly looking down on them. Saint Selina states that she is also suspicious of Eccles and came here on her own. Sislurp cries out that his 5-horned crown is weeping. He proclaims that with their 5 horns, they receive the breath of the god of Genesis, and as his proxies they must carry out his duty. He reminds everyone that God created the earth for humanity to live in peace for all eternity. Sislurp looks down from his dais and asks Eccles why he stands in God's way. Eccles states he has no intention of obstructing God's will and asks why he is suspected of such a thing. He addresses Sir Eckerd directly. Eckerd declares that he has 4 points of concern, starting with the first. Eckerd brings up the matter of Eccles abandoning his subordinate, Culnelson. He alleges that at the World Tree, Eccles abandoned his treatment and fled the scene. Lady Cupra adds that the World Tree is filled with dangerous races and leaving someone behind to potentially start a fight would be disastrous. She questions how he cannot see how inhumane his actions were. Eckerd claims that because of Eccles, the country is on the cusp of an emergency and it's easy to imagine retaliation. He advises Eccles that it would be in his best interest to apologize in good faith. Eccles offers a seemingly sincere apology from the bottom of his heart. Eccles performs a deep formal bow. Cardinal Sislurp smirks triumphantly. Meanwhile, Eccles's followers look on from a nearby doorway. Eccles clarifies that there was no way he could have known that Sislurp's disciple, Sir Sislurp, was so incapable. Sislurp is stunned into silence. He sputters in disbelief. Lady Cupra furiously demands to know what Eccles just said. Eccles calmly asks if it would be better for him to leave after all. Eckerd demands to know what he means by that. Eccles explains that he was told beforehand that Culnelson would be joining him, and since he is affiliated with the Kavash faction, he believed it was an order from the Council of Cardinals. Eccles explains that he wouldn't have operated with a person he was completely unfamiliar with instead of his own 6 stars. He states that all of their accusations are contrary to the facts and prepares to see himself out. Cupra insists that even if he wasn't his subordinate, their affiliation means the responsibility lies solely on him. Eccles questions whether he is truly responsible for Culnelson's inability, but affirms that if the country is ever in strife, he will use his power to defend it. Cupra shouts that if they truly want to hold someone responsible, they should start by investigating their own orders, as Eccles holds no responsibility in the matter. Eckerd yells that this is Eccles's inquisition, not theirs, and accuses the Archbishop of being connected to the disaster that occurred the other day. Eckerd reveals that under imprisonment, an arsonist named Byrne allegedly confessed to the Papal Secret Service that the Archbishop deliberately set the city on fire. He accuses Eccles and the 6 stars of knowing Byrne was going to commit arson and leaving him at large on purpose. Eccles says he is honestly taken aback that they would suspect him, the person who caught the arsonist, based on the arsonist's word. Eckerd furiously demands to know if he doesn't think the disaster and carnage could have been avoided. Eccles agrees that it could have been avoided if it was His Grace, Cardinal Narsap. Eckerd is flustered by the mention of Sir Narsap. Eccles explains that since Cardinal Narsap governs the southern district, including the prostitute town, the disaster would not have happened if Narsap had ascertained Byrne's intentions. Eccles muses that he would be much better off if he were to convey what is unfolding to Sir Narsap, a veteran of the Council of Cardinals. Eckerd accuses him of not only setting the dragons on them, but also planning to force them into conflict with another cardinal. Eccles calmly observes that Eckerd has finally stated his true intentions. Eccles confronts Saint Selina, asking how long she plans on pointing her staff at him. He demands to know on what grounds she, who is not part of the Inquisition or a cardinal, takes such an attitude towards him, leaving her stammering. Eccles firmly requests that she and the others leave. Selina turns to leave, shocked. Sislurp offers his condolences to Lady Selina. She excuses herself and leaves abruptly. The doors slam shut behind Selina. Sislurp reveals that he got Selina's help because her sense of rivalry is why Eccles came without complaint. Sislurp gloats that they aren't finished yet, stating that for the second point, Eccles only shifted the blame. This leads to his third point of concern, the suspicious so-called holy water that Eccles's entourage makes. Eccles explains that holy water is a common name for a drink made from fruits, a tradition among rural dwellers to stop wounds from festering, and that his is just a repurposing of that tradition. Sislurp scoffs, asking if Eccles truly believes that serves as an appropriate explanation. Cupra shouts that no matter how he polishes it, his holy water is manufactured by slum dwellers, and clergymen pretending it can grant divinity goes against the teachings of God. Eckerd adds that in order to continue making that foul concoction, Eccles dared to commit arson on such a large scale. Eccles calls it a hilarious delusion and asks with what evidence they accuse him. Sislurp challenges him to provide evidence that proves it is a delusion. He then reveals that as for their evidence, they can produce as much as needed. Eccles's expression hardens into a furious glare. Sislurp smugly asks him how about that. Eccles says he sees now, and that he was suspicious about what they had mustered against him, realizing it was never a formal inquisition. He calls the proceedings a farce, an inquisition by name only, meant to intimidate him on top of taking hostages. He closes his eyes and asks what they want him to do. Sislurp chuckles, saying this makes things easier. He brings up his fourth and final point. Not long after the incident with Culnelson, one of Eccles's 6 stars came back heavily injured from the World Tree. He feigns curiosity, wondering what could have happened. Sislurp feigns wonder, asking if Eccles doesn't wonder too. He tells Eccles that he wouldn't be ignorant of what happens to the 6 stars and that he must properly grasp his subordinate's failure. He finishes with a threat, stating this is true, that is, if Eccles were human. A voice announces, "Here I go." A hand carefully lifts the skin around a wound. Surgical scissors move in to snip the stitches. The patient lets out a small sound as the procedure is completed. Coronet announces that the stitch removal is complete and asks her master how he feels. Amami flexes his arm, thrilled that he feels great, and the wound scarred so well that he can move it normally. He enthusiastically thanks Coronet. Coronet beams, saying she is thankful too, and thanks him for entrusting this to her. Amami explains to the group that this is the fruit of their labor, as sewing and suturing share the same foundations. Amami and Coronet agree to practice together. Chloe and Saya timidly ask if they can join in as well. Amami smiles and says of course, inviting Chloe and Saya to join them. Amami mentions that he will be busy with Yuno and Alec today, so perhaps they should postpone. A horned woman tells Alec that the circumstances of the recent incident don't matter. What she's concerned about is who is pulling the strings. Others around the table agree, vowing to kill whoever is responsible when they find them. An elven leader states they have only one thought, that the person is important, and that is why they will respond with appropriate force. She announces that their priority is to find the truth behind the incident and orders Captain Minnell to form and take command of a survey corps. A guard bursts in shouting that he is reporting. Another elf tells Philin that they are in the middle of a conference. Philin apologizes for the intrusion, but insists his news is urgent. With tensions rising between elves and humans due to Amami's injuries, the guard reports that Archbishop Eccles has returned to the World Tree. The news hangs in the air as Eccles's determined eyes are shown. A voice cries out, begging someone named Darzustel to stop, but their plea is met with the sound of immense strain. Darzustel's hands tremble violently from the exertion. Sweat pours down his face as he grits his teeth, determined to push through the agony. He steels himself, believing he is the only one who can complete this task. He reaffirms his resolve, knowing no one else can provide for their people. Watching him, a young girl's eyes well up with tears. The young girl, Parla, runs frantically through a downpour, determined to find a way to save the man she left behind. Unsure if she's heading the right way, Parla resolves to find higher ground to check her position. She spots her goal in the distance, the World Tree, and feels a surge of relief knowing she's close. Finding a small cave, she ducks inside, hoping to be safe from the relentless rain. Parla expresses her relief at finally being out of the rain. Suddenly, a loud growl from behind startles her, her eyes widening in fear. A shadowy beast with a long neck and menacing, glowing eyes emerges from the depths of the cave. Parla lets out a terrified scream. The creature, a winged lion, also cries out, seemingly just as frightened. She flees in terror, scrambling away from the beast. In her haste, she slips and falls into the rushing water. She is flung through the air, completely at the mercy of the elements. She crashes violently against a large tree. With blood streaming down her face, she cries out apologies to Darzastel and the others. Her last thoughts are of Chief Normim as she succumbs to her injuries. The creature's snake-like tail coils around Parla, securing her. The winged lion flies through the rain, carrying the unconscious girl to safety. Parla is unconscious, her face showing the severity of her wounds. Standing before an encampment, Saul asks Fia what their next move is. Fia recalls their instructions to look around for anything that could help Zess while she talks to the high-ups, remarking that he always makes it sound easy. They observe that the security detail is intense. Fia wonders if it's dangerous for him to go alone, but Saul believes it will be fine since they were told to snoop around. Fia decides they should get some food, but is cut off mid-thought. Saul shouts that it's a monster and they must act, but Fia tries to hold him back. The massive winged lion lands before a small figure in a white coat, with the injured Parla. Parla thanks the creature for bringing her here and apologizes for being afraid despite its kindness. The creature grunts in response, seemingly exhausted. Parla struggles, weakened by her injuries. Despite her pain, Parla is determined to continue until she meets Chief Normim. Saul and Fia approach the injured traveler and offer their help, saying they will heal her. The elf holding Parla rejects their offer, explaining that they can't rely on outsiders because the cost would be too high. Fia asks him to clarify what he means, while Saul asks if they can provide healing. From inside a tent, voices express alarm that someone is badly injured and wonder if the humans are with them. Coronet, Chloe, and Saya listen with concern. One of the women asks about Sir Amami's whereabouts. Coronet explains that Alec took Amami to hide in the dragon's place before the humans came. Amami worries about everyone's safety, but Alec assures him that he left Elle to protect them. Alec tells Amami that for now his priority is his own safety, as he could be a target. Alec firmly states that he cannot allow Amami to meet them. Amami argues, worried about what might happen if someone gets sick or injured while he's away. Alec tells him it will only be for a short while and to just pray nothing happens as an image of the injured Parla flashes by. Parla lies in bed, groaning in pain from her severe injury. Coronet panics, realizing she has to stop the bleeding but feels she can't do it alone. She thinks of calling her master for help, but then realizes she can't because the humans are there. An elven man demands to know where the humans are, and Coronet tells him they are at the castle gate. He worries about letting them heal the girl's wounds. He fears the humans might use the situation to make demands, connecting them to the explosion at the jail and the disappearance of hostages. Coronet, Chloe, and Saya stand together, looking tense. Saul and Fia stand opposite them in the rain. Chloe steps forward, apologizing for any upset, but insists that they must let the humans treat Parla, as her life is the most valuable thing. Chloe and Coronet look on as Parla refuses help. Parla explains that accepting their help will only cause problems for her and her companions. She cries that they can't possibly scrape together enough to pay for healing in the country of humans. She blames herself for imposing on them and pleads for them to just leave her. A memory of her master's words flashes through Coronet's mind. She recalls him saying that doctors do not run from their patients. The weight of the memory and the current situation causes Coronet visible distress. The injured girl apologizes for making her worry, confused by her reaction. Coronet's resolve hardens. She declares she must handle this herself and will expedite the treatment. She tells Saya and Chloe to leave, believing it is for the best that they are not present. Saya defiantly says she won't run away anymore. Chloe agrees, declaring that her indomitable spirit is her strength, and she will stay as well. Saya looks to Coronet, ready to receive orders. Coronet instructs Chloe to use the technique she used before. She tells Saya to prepare some water in the meantime. Coronet prepares to wash the wound with distilled water. She carefully pours the water on the wound, noting that saline would be better, and asks Parla to tell her if it hurts. Parla is shocked by the sensation. Chloe smiles, telling her that it doesn't hurt. Coronet then instructs Saya that it is her turn to help. The elven man bursts in with Fia and Saul, demanding to know what is going on. His guards rush in, shouting orders to find the humans. As Saya tends to the patient, a narration describes her as potent against pain, venom 3 and 30. A guard screams that they are illegally trespassing on castle grounds and must stand down. Chloe and Saya are startled by the sudden appearance of the guards. Fia steps forward, telling the guards that the treatment isn't finished and that they must not interfere. With a knowing smile, Fia asks Coronet if she is really the one healing her. Coronet glares back, defiantly stating that she is treating her. Fia smiles warmly, dismissing any hostility and noting that the girl is using purification magic. Saya recognizes her, calling her Fia Senpai and thanking her for her help at the seminary. Fia realizes Saya was the acting deacon for Culnelson. She then asks how the treatment is going. Coronet announces that the washing and purification are done and she will now close the wound to stop the bleeding. Fia tells Saul that their teacher wouldn't say no, so it should be fine for them to help out. Saul agrees to do it. He casts a spell, chanting a rhyme about an apple overcoming venom. A flash of light erupts from Saul's hand as he unleashes his magic, startling the others. The magic flows into Parla's wound. The girls are stunned to see the cut has completely healed. Saul observes that the bleeding has stopped and asks if this will be fine. Saul reminds the elf that he said from the start that he would heal her. The elf angrily retorts that if he had just listened, it would have been clear. Saul states that thanks to the elf's poor judgment, he's now in a terrible mood. Completely healed, Parla beams and thanks everyone for saving her life. She begs them not to fight and vows to repay the human country for their help. Fia tells Parla that there's no need to pay them back as it was just an impulse. She says they will leave now for her sake. Coronet asks if Parla wants to meet Normim-san. Parla eagerly confirms, saying she needs to ask him something. She apologizes for the late introduction and states her name is Parla. She reveals she is the daughter of Chief Normim and wife of King Dazastal, stunning the girls who realize she is the queen of the dwarves. Parla apologizes for the bother and asks to be shown around. A voice calls out to Parla, exclaiming it's been a long time. Inside a forge, Chief Normim greets Parla, happy to see her in good health. Parla urgently tells him that King Dazastal has the hammer sickness. Coronet looks on, confused about what hammer sickness is. Parla explains that it's a condition where one's fingers go numb, rendering them unable to use tools. She clarifies that for a tradesman hammer sickness means death, and for dwarves their very survival depends on their tradesmanship. She cries that without the king's strength, they can't mine adamantine anymore and their livelihoods will be destroyed. Parla explains her dilemma and why she came to the World Tree seeking his help, but he simply tells her to leave. Parla is shocked by his cold dismissal. Normim doesn't even look at her, claiming to be busy and stating he is no longer her king. Parla stands dejected, muttering Normim's name. As Coronet wonders what they should do, a small boy appears, calling out for his mother. The boy's eyes well up with tears as he recognizes his mother. The boy cries out for his mum and runs into her arms for a tearful hug. Coronet watches the emotional reunion with a gentle smile. Parla apologizes to her son, saying she's been so busy without him for many years. The boy explains that he came down with appendicitis, but Dr. Amami saved his life. Parla is confused by the terms Dr. Amami and appendicitis. Coronet proudly states that Amami is her master and suggests he should look at Parla's wound. She adds that she's sure he can do something about the hammer sickness too. Parla's eyes widen with hope as she asks if he is truly able to do something so amazing. Coronet smiles brightly, confirming with a resounding yes, and declaring that her master is an amazing person they must go meet. Eccles reports to his team that his meeting with the bigwigs was worthwhile and went smoothly. Ekres exclaims that they struck gold. Fia notes that while they still don't know what happened to Zess, she has a guess, adding that if she were Zess, she wouldn't be able to sit still. Lintvium reports that this country possesses its own healing method, distinct from the churches. Looking down from the bridge, Fia tells Eccles that the World Tree has got to go. An unseen individual asks if they understand what happened during the Dark Elves' raid. In a large hall, an elf acknowledges that treating the spitting blood disease was a mistake and offers a deep apology. Ekres explains to the other elf that humans are also uninformed about the situation with the Dark Elves and asks what just happened. Ekres states that unless they resolve the misunderstandings between them, they will be stuck forever and asks for their cooperation. 3 elven women listen with stoic expressions. As Ekres begins to speak, he is interrupted by someone excusing themselves. Lintvium offers tea to Mr. Archbishop with a knowing smile. She continues, revealing that a priest among their sacred healers neglected his duties and was subsequently arrested at the World Tree. Outside a building, a voice mentions hearing that the dragons set up a good place to eat. Inside, a famished Fia eagerly asks for their recommended food and drink. The server asks if alcohol is acceptable, and Sol confirms it is. Shia sits quietly at a table in the corner. Sol complains that the atmosphere isn't great, with everyone staring at them, but Fia tells him to get over it. A server brings them their order of kelwisha and tacos. Sol is surprised by the cold beer and the unfamiliar dish of tacos. He takes a tentative bite of the taco. His eyes widen in shock at the taste. He quickly follows it with a large gulp of the cold beer. He burps and exclaims how unbelievably good the food is, shocking Fia. The taste triggers a vivid memory of being caught in the rain and seeing a tree get struck by lightning. Fia recalls seeing the tree come down the next day and thinks he's exaggerating. Fia takes a bite and is overwhelmed with how delicious it is. Sol seems vindicated by her reaction. The horned bartender compliments the food, and the chef replies without worry. Fia, now curious, begins to ask about the meal. The bartender asks if this is really the legendary food of the dragons. Fia presses on, saying she knows they eat it at the World Tree and just wants to be sure. The bartender explains that it's a dish he made up for guests from the country of the night. Sol quietly acknowledges this new information. Coronet, Chloe, and Saya arrive at the tavern. Sol and Fia watch the new arrivals. The bartender welcomes the new group and tells his staff about a large taco order from Alec. Fia smiles and apologizes to Saya, explaining she was just antsy because she was hungry. Saya looks up surprised as Fia asks if she wants to chat. Coronet watches the interaction, murmuring Saya's name. Fia mentions it's been a while since the seminary. She recalls Saya's misfortune in being assigned to a hopeless deacon and constantly getting involved with troublesome men. Saya thanks Fia for her help during those times. Fia offers to pull some strings to get Saya back into the church. Saya seems taken aback by the mention of Culnelson. Fia explains she heard he ran off with the Dark Elves and asks if Saya is okay on her own. Saya firmly refuses, saying she would rather stay here. Fia quietly accepts her decision. Fia decides it's time for her and Sol to leave. She says goodbye to Saya, telling her they'll be heading back to their country. Chloe and Coronet watch them go. Alec and a companion observe from a distance. Amami tells a stunned Parla that her wound is fine now. He offers to clean it up further for her, much to her surprise. Parla asks if he can clean the wound more than regeneration magic can, and Amami explains it's a hypertrophic scar that will stand out. Parla admits she's intrigued by the offer. However, she decides against it for now, saying she's happy as long as the pain is gone. Parla begs Amami to heal King Dazastel's hammer sickness, recalling that his disciple thought he could help. She insists they will do anything, even if he's busy. Amami agrees to head out and check on the king's sickness. Alec decides to go along as Amami's guardian, reasoning that the smoky place might not be so bad. Amami confirms he will help, much to Parla's relief. He makes a condition: if he can fix the hammer sickness, he would like to treat her wound. Parla gratefully accepts, thanking Dr. Amami and apologizing for her earlier doubts. Parla presses Amami, asking if he can really heal anything. Amami is momentarily flustered by the question. Alec notes that it's perfect timing, as Amami has another patient. Alec asks what's wrong, and a woman explains that a girl hurt her arm and she was bringing her to her master. The woman tearfully explains she grabbed the girl's arm in a panic when she was about to fall. Amami asks them to wait a moment. He asks the girl to try lifting both of her arms as high as she can. The girl is unable to fully raise her injured arm. He asks for a second to examine the arm. Amami gently manipulates the girl's winged arm. He confirms that the structure is as he thought and declares it okay. He performs a quick adjustment, causing the girl to cry out. The girl gasps in surprise, feeling the immediate difference. Parla watches in stunned silence. Amami asks the girl to try lifting her arms once more. The girl joyfully raises her arms, completely healed. Amami smiles, pleased with the result. He explains to the caretaker that it was a nursemaid's elbow, a common injury in children, and asks her to be careful in the future. A diagram illustrates the anatomy of a nursemaid's elbow, showing the radial head subluxation. Parla is awestruck, realizing Amami's incredible skill. She watches as Amami waves goodbye, calling him a magician. Amami smiles, confident in his ability to help. Parla calls out to Dr. Amami, offering a profound apology for her earlier behavior. She bows low, begging him to treat her and her husband. A young boy shouts for the chief. Chief Normum turns, asking Hugh what has him so worked up. Hugh excitedly tells him that Dark Amami is going with his mom to see his dad and asks if the chief is coming too. The chief listens with a stern expression. The chief tells Hugh he won't do it, calling it his own fault. He angrily recounts how his son ignored the basics of their craft and tradition and even insulted him on his way out. The chief declares that he hasn't forgiven that idiot. Hugh cries out that his grandpa is mean. He runs away in tears, leaving the chief to watch. Nino points out that Hugh still thinks of him as a grandpa and suggests he should give in. The chief ignores the advice and tells Nino to get back in gear. A voice calls out to make sure everyone has what they need. Alec looks at the large vehicle and asks what it is, noting the trip will take a while. The chief proudly explains he had Norman build a carriage for them that both he and the forest guard can drive. Hugh praises the chief for being on top of everything. A woman calls out, apologizing to the waiting group for being late. Fia and the woman named Yuno-san arrive. Korone stares in shock. Saya is equally stunned by their appearance. The forest guard angrily demands to know why a human is with them. Fia holds up her hands, telling it not to blow its top. Saya asks her senpai what is going on. Yuno-san nervously explains that Archbishop Eccles made the request. Fia explains that she, a member of the 6 Stars, is to be taken in by the World Tree government as part of a new partnership to regain trust. The dragon expresses its confusion. Fia notes that the situation has changed. Fia explains the church wants to work together and she is here as proof, essentially a hostage. She points out that her regeneration magic, on top of Saya's purification magic, will be very handy. The dragon scoffs, saying there's no way it will believe that. Amami addresses Fia, confirming her name. Amami introduces himself as Amami Yuito. He asks if Fia would mind coming to the dwarves' country with them. The dragon shouts Amami's name, clearly disapproving. Fia explains her hesitation, saying she is still scared and doesn't want to cause trouble. Amami passionately argues that Fia will be of use, and that his greater fear is inaction. Parla and Hugh listen to the doctor's words. Alec agrees, telling Fia to stay by his side, and Amami happily thanks him. Alec asks Fia about her other companion from the 6 Stars. Fia points out a figure in the distance, saying, "Speak of the devil." Amami asks which one is the Archbishop, and Fia specifies it's the one with horns on his head. Ekres stands alone, looking out over the landscape. Amami stares, realizing he is looking at the human Archbishop. Hugh calls out in surprise to his grandpa, who is wiping down the vehicle. The chief expresses some concern about the vehicle's construction, admitting he's never made one to fly so far. Amami suggests the chief should join them in case the vehicle breaks down. Hugh and Parla excitedly ask if their grandpa is coming too. The chief insists they shouldn't get him wrong, he's just going to make sure nothing happens. The children cheer, thanking him. Amami smiles, ready to depart. Amami excitedly announces the start of their journey. The 2 flying vehicles lift off, beginning their long trip. From afar, a figure calls out to Mr. Eccles. As they walk away from the departing group, Eccles's companion expresses his worry about leaving Fia behind, but Eccles reassures him she'll be fine. Eccles explains that leaving her behind will naturally lead to criticism from the higher-ups. He declares that they will put out those sparks before they can spread, for Fia's benefit. The dragon-carried vehicle speeds through the air. Inside, the entire group is gathered, ready for the journey ahead. Amami looks ahead with a determined expression. Fia watches from inside the carriage, thinking that this will be fun and she'll get a good look. In a snow-covered land, a dwarf named Zofel is asked by his king how things are going. Zofel reports that despite the heavy snow, they have managed to put up another retaining wall and a snow canal at Mount Bota, and things are going as well as can be expected. The king acknowledges the report and entrusts the rest to Zofel. Other dwarves complain amongst themselves, frustrated that they can't mine for mana with the festival of the spirits approaching. They grumble about King Darzastal, wondering if he feels the pressure they are under. Zofel reflects on the king's situation. In the past, some have healed their hammer sickness by resting their arm, and King Darzastal is betting on that possibility. A dwarf erupts in frustration, yelling that waiting for a natural recovery is as useless as waiting for the snow to stop falling. He desperately questions if there is anything else they can do. Elsewhere, Amami and Coronet travel through the snow. Zoful explains he's opening a window now that the sun is down, to avoid any sunlight getting on Chloe. Coronet asks Lady Chloe if she knows of their destination, Nox Mine. Both Coronet and Amami react with surprise to Chloe's knowledge. Chloe confirms that she certainly does. Chloe explains that the mine was once a cave system where vampires lived to avoid the daylight. Parla bows deeply, apologizing to Chloe. She says they will never forget the sacrifice the vampires made by giving them the cave after the great disaster. She promises that for the Festival of the Spirits, they will definitely honor their memory. Chloe asks them to cease their apologies, assuring them that her people hold no ill will. Amami, overhearing the conversation, asks what the great disaster and Festival of the Spirits are. As their carriage descends for a landing, they are told they will be there soon. On the ground, the dwarves are startled by the sight of approaching figures in the sky. They cry out in alarm, identifying a dragon and a chimera. The two creatures land in the snow before the dwarven village. The dwarven soldiers stand on guard, ready for a confrontation. A voice from atop the dragon tells them there's no need to be on edge. Parla calls out to Zoful and the others, announcing that she has brought help and asking them to make way. The dwarves look on in disbelief, questioning if she truly brought help. King Darzastal steps forward, his eyes wide with a mix of hope and skepticism, and asks Parla if what she says is true. Parla introduces Dr. Amami to her father, and Amami thanks them for having him. King Darzastal is shocked and angered, questioning why she brought a human. In the background, a sleepy Shia wonders if they have arrived yet. The king coldly tells Amami and his group that they have to leave. He thanks Parla for her efforts but says it was for nothing. Parla is shocked to hear that her father has already tried seeking help from humans. He recounts how a useless priest under someone named Eckerd came, failed to help and fleeced him. Fia steps forward asking to have a look, explaining that since the priest was from her church she's interested. The king, suspicious, asks if she's from the church too. Fia confirms but reassures him she doesn't want his money. Amami urges them to let the group inside out of the freezing cold, and the king reluctantly agrees. Before they enter, the king asks Parla if she brought her father along. He rants that her father was a fool who neglected the basics of their craft and left without reflecting on his actions. Parla cries out that there's no way she can face him now. Suddenly, Chief Normim appears, remarking on King Darzastal's energy. King Darzastal retorts that it has been a while, and he has no plans to play happy families, telling them to get inside. Parla defends Dr. Amami, telling the king that his respect should extend to their guests. Darzastal snaps back that he was about to, until Normim showed up, accusing him of going senile. The two old dwarves face off, about to fight. Amami and the others panic, worried that they'll get hurt and the king's sickness will worsen. Normim taunts Darzastal about his weak hand, offering to go one-handed. Darzastal retorts that one arm is all he needs, and that he is the one being considerate. With a powerful grunt, the two lock hands in an arm-wrestling match. Amami's group watches in shock. The other dwarves also watch the spectacle unfold. Normim strains, confident in his strength. Darzastal grits his teeth, refusing to yield. The arm-wrestling match is a stalemate, with neither giving an inch. Normim laughs, boasting that Darzastal can't beat him, while Darzastal insists on a best-of-3. Meanwhile, the others observe that the two seem quite close. The two men prepare for another round. Chloe, now wearing a mask, looks on. She tells them this is not the time for their games, striking them both. King Darzastal recognizes Lady Chloe, noting it has been a while since she last visited. Parla is surprised they are acquainted. The king explains that Chloe was present when her people handed over this place to the dwarves. He reflects on how, despite the curse of the sun, the vampires led them to these caves, which served as an important shield for them. The king explains that the Festival of the Spirits was their promise to Chloe's father, King Lugan, and a way to convey their debt to their children. Chloe thanks him but gently reminds him that he must first think of his illness and take care of himself. The king bows his head, accepting her words. Amami confirms with the king that there's no obvious swelling, but his hand is numb and tingly. Fia observes, concluding that this condition is not compatible with their healing methods. A younger woman asks what she means by compatible. Fia explains that healing magic struggles with conditions like hammer sickness that lack physical symptoms. The woman with horns scoffs at the church's incompetence, but another woman notes that it might have some effect on minor afflictions. Amami interjects, stating that believe it or not, there are things even the church can't deal with, but his boss might be able to help. Amami asks King Darzastal to perform a diagnostic test for him. Darzastal complies, holding the backs of his hands together as instructed. The Phelan's test is a diagnostic tool for carpal tunnel syndrome, which triggers symptoms by compressing the median nerve in the wrist. Amami tells him to hold the posture for a minute. Suddenly, the king cries out in pain. He describes the sensation as having pins and needles in his wrist. Shia looks on, startled by his reaction. The other dwarves panic, demanding to know what is happening to their king. Parla cries out Dr. Amami's name in alarm. He calmly asks to see the king's hand for a proper diagnosis. Noting the Thenar eminence hasn't atrophied much, he decides to check for Tinel's sign. He taps on the king's wrist, eliciting another jolt of pain. The king groans as the test comes back positive. Tinel's sign is a test to detect irritated and damaged nerves by tapping over them to elicit a pain response. Amami asks if the pins and needles are in his thumb and the middle finger side of his ring finger. The king confirms this, stunned, and asks how he could possibly know that. Shia asks Amami if he's figured something out. Amami confidently states that if the bodies of dwarves are the same as humans, then he knows what causes their hammer sickness. The others react with shock and disbelief. Coronet asks her master to explain the cause. Amami announces his diagnosis. He believes King Darzastal has carpal tunnel syndrome. Coronet repeats the name of the condition, confused. Shia asks for an explanation. Amami explains that it's a condition where the median nerve, which passes through the wrist, gets compressed, causing the pins and needles sensation. Amami adds that it's a condition often seen in people whose jobs require a lot of hand use. The king grimly states that for dwarves, their hands are a matter of life or death. Amami explains that light symptoms could recover with rest, but the king asks if he can fix it since rest didn't work. Amami declares that if rest and magic don't work, he can operate on the wrist and fix it. The king is taken aback by the mention of surgery. Hugh excitedly asks if it's like when Amami cut his tummy open. Amami confirms that by removing the part of the wrist compressing the nerve, the king should be fine. Enraged upon hearing that Amami cut his son's stomach open, the king grabs him by the collar. The others shout for him to stop as he lifts Amami into the air. The king's hand trembles with his affliction. Hugh calls out to his father, telling him to look. He lifts his shirt, revealing a faint, clean scar on his stomach. The king stares in utter shock at the proof of Amami's work. Hugh proudly proclaims that Dr. Amami cut out the evil in his tummy and healed him. The king can only stammer in disbelief, realizing Amami truly did cut him open. The other dwarves are equally astounded. Hugh then pleads with his father to let Dr. Amami perform the operation on him. The king, now convinced, asks if cutting into his hand with a knife will truly fix the problem. Amami confirms it will. The other dwarves express their reservations, stating that the king's hands decide the prospects of them all. The king's demeanor changes completely, exclaiming that they've finally found a glimmer of hope. He warmly welcomes Dr. Amami to his country again and offers him a tour of their finest food. Amami tells the king to relax until the preparations are complete. As the king leaves, he glances back at Parla. Coronet expresses her relief to Amami that he managed to get the king to agree to the surgery. Chloe watches them, silent and thoughtful. Outside, Chief Normum tells Zofel he is inspecting the carriage. Zofel praises the king, calling him a chieftain of legend, but laments the unfortunate relation between blood and talent. He explains that after the great calamity, only the king's blood relatives can gather enough mana for the divine ceremony, yet King Darzastal is afflicted. King Darzastal overhears and passionately declares that they can only rely on this moment. Chief Normum questions his obsession with the festival, dismissing it as just some daft event. Darzastal explains the importance of the tradition inherited from the country of the night, stating that while they could forego the oath, it would mean plastering over the sublime history of their benefactors. Darzastal shouts that there is no way they can do that. He begs Chief Normum to understand. Amami approaches, asking what's happening. Darzastal, recovering his composure, says they just finished talking. Amami tells them that he needs some tools for the surgery, and Normum asks if the ones he and the dragon made are not enough. Amami explains that while they have enough in theory, this isn't his field of specialty, so he'd like some extra tools for contingency. Shia interjects, asking if he wants the tools for her son. Normim acknowledges he has a big debt to the doctor. Chief Normim declares that as long as it's for the doctor's sake, he'll make anything he wants. He tells Zofel to help out as well, though not for his own sake. Darzastel is moved to tears by the gesture. Shia teases Normim for not being more honest with himself. A woman comments on the Dwarf King's bravery, shuddering at the thought of surgery on her dominant hand. Shia sits alone, wondering if the king is all right. Chloe reflects on the situation, stating that with all the talk of debt and sacrifice, the king's disease is not just his problem but her country's as well. Parla watches her husband, her eyes filled with tears as she remarks on the immense weight he must carry on his shoulders. King Darzastel's expression is resolute. He sits by the fire preparing for what's to come. A dwarf shouts with determination as he prepares to work. Chief Normim gives the order to begin. As the wheel turns with a great whirring sound, the onlookers watch the process with rapt attention. Amami inspects the newly crafted tools, amazed that they were created from just a verbal explanation. Amami is startled by Alec's sudden appearance, who presses him about the tools for the treatment. Alec angrily shouts at the group. Her anger quickly fades into a playful taunt. She confirms Amami's name is Yuito. Intrigued, Alec asks to observe the surgery. Taken aback but seeing no reason to refuse, Amami agrees. The operating room is prepared for the surgery. A dwarf asks Amami if the shaking from an earthquake the previous night disturbed his sleep. King Darzastel worries that the recent, frequent earthquakes are a bad omen for the surgery. Amami responds with determination. Amami reacts with alarm to the news of repeated earthquakes. Chloe seems lost in thought. Coronet asks what's wrong, and Chloe explains her concern is related to a legend about the Divine Spirit Festival. Chloe explains the legend warns of a great disaster if the festival is not held. Amami realizes the legend might be describing a volcanic eruption. A dwarf panics, realizing that if Nox erupts, their town will be destroyed. Amami confirms that the prophecy is conditional on the festival's cancellation. The king urges calm, insisting that once he is healed, the crisis will be averted. Parla cries, overwhelmed by the pressure on her father. The surgical team assembles around King Darzastel, ready to begin. Amami announces that his first step is to determine the location for the incision. He warns the king that the marking pen might tickle. The king stoically tells him to do as he sees fit. Amami carefully marks the surgical site on the king's hand. He identifies the target, the intersection of the ulnar edge of the middle finger and Kaplan's cardinal line. A diagram illustrates the anatomical landmarks Amami is using to find the correct spot. Alec looks on in confusion, asking what that is. Alec observes with curiosity, noting that he is writing without an inkwell. Amami explains that the ink is contained within the pen, adding that he would prefer to use a proper surgical one if available. Alec marvels at the technology, calling it a neat gadget. Alec apologizes to Yuito for the interruption. Amami welcomes her questions, explaining that the more she knows, the better, as he may need her help later. Amami takes out an S-mark tourniquet, explaining that it will help prevent bleeding during the operation. The king expresses his astonishment that bleeding can be prevented. Amami asks the king to lift his arm to begin the process. The king holds his arm up as instructed. Amami begins wrapping the limb to exsanguinate it. He pulls the bandage tight as he works his way up the arm. He asks an assistant named Yuno-san to tie the band tightly around the king's upper arm. With Yuno-san's help, the tourniquet is secured. The king grits through the discomfort, stating he's fine for now, while Amami tells him a sleeping potion is available if needed. Amami says he is going to get scrubbed in for the surgery. He asks Coronet to handle the disinfecting in the meantime. He instructs her to disinfect the entire arm up to where it's tied off. Coronet begins to carefully disinfect the king's arm. The king comments on the weird feeling as Coronet cleans his hand. Coronet helps Amami get properly suited for surgery, and he thanks her. Coronet informs Amami that she has also put down the clean drapes. Amami looks over the prepared surgical site and declares it perfect. Shia enters, ready to perform anesthesia. She is taken aback when Amami says he won't need her services for now. Amami explains that he intends to use local anesthesia but will call on her if the patient finds it too much to bear. He invites Shia to observe so she can learn about pain control in addition to anesthesia. Shia inquires about the meaning of pain control. Amami explains that pain control encompasses various methods to treat different kinds of pain, including her own magic and other techniques like nerve blocks. He tells her there are many ways to control pain, and he was hoping for her help. Shia happily agrees to stay and observe the procedure. When Shia asks about her magic, Amami asks her to use it first to numb the area for the injection. A magical energy crackles around the king's hand. The king describes the odd sensation of numbness coming and going. Amami prepares to administer the local anesthetic. He carefully injects the anesthetic along the pre-drawn incision line. He proceeds to apply the local anesthesia into the carpal tunnel. He asks King Darzastal if he is doing all right. The king confirms he feels no pain from the injections, finding the lack of sensation strange. The king gives him the go-ahead to continue. With everything in place, Amami announces the official start of the carpal tunnel release surgery. The king watches with a tense expression as the surgery begins. The other dwarves watch the surgery with grim focus. Alec observes the procedure with a serious expression. Parla watches her father, her eyes filled with tears. Meanwhile, a child runs through the snow, calling out for their master. The child asks Normim where he is going, while Amami is performing surgery on their father. The child questions why he isn't staying to support the king. Normim states that his part in making the tools is done, and that he has a more pressing matter to attend to. The child is left confused by his cryptic words. Amami requests a round-edged scalpel from Korone. He focuses, preparing to make the first cut at Kaplan's cardinal line. He makes the incision carefully, ensuring he doesn't go too far and cause a flexion contracture. The king watches intently as the surgery proceeds on his own hand. Alec remarks in astonishment that the hand isn't bleeding, realizing it's because of the bowingy band Amami used. Amami asks King Darzastal about the pain. The king grits his teeth and tells him to keep going. Amami asks Korone for some gauze, which she provides. He states his intention to remove more subcutaneous tissue. Amami makes another careful slice. He calls to Korone, telling her to use the double-pronged retractors to open the incision. Korone holds the custom-made retractors, ready for her task. Korone uses the retractors to pull the wound open. Alec shudders as she watches the graphic procedure. Nervously, Korone asks if the retraction is sufficient, and Amami encourages her to keep it like that. Amami then calls on Chloe for the next step. Amami explains his plan to use flat retractors to minimize the incision size, asking Chloe to open the wound up and down. Chloe acknowledges the instruction. Chloe turns to Korone and asks to be excused as she joins the effort. The retractors stretch the incision open, providing a clear view of the underlying tissue. Korone's heart races from the intensity of the procedure. Amami encourages his assistants, telling them to hold the retractors steady. The king stoically endures the procedure. Amami announces his next step, cutting open the fat layer. He carefully cuts into the layer of fat. The scalpel slices through the tissue. Amami identifies the vertical structure at the bottom of the fat layer as the palmar aponeurosis. He makes another small cut. He instructs Korone to use the retractors again to move the palmar aponeurosis to the sides. He pauses, observing something unexpected. Korone notices Amami's pause and asks what the matter is. Amami explains his surprise at finding fat in an unusual location, speculating it might be due to the patient being a dwarf. Alec watches him, her expression growing concerned. Alec angrily confronts Amami, accusing him of performing dangerous and uncertain quackery. She offers an ultimatum. If he's in over his head, she will use her magic to close the wound immediately. Korone looks on with concern. Amami thanks her but insists he is fine and intends to keep going. The king's eyes show his unwavering trust. Alec looks on, still tense and worried. Amami announces he is cutting the fat layer again. He identifies the tissue running alongside it as the transverse carpal ligament. He explains that this ligament acts as the lid of the carpal tunnel, which is the problem area. Korone repeats the word lid, trying to understand. He describes how the carpal tunnel is surrounded by bones and covered by the flexor retinaculum. An anatomical chart details the various components of the hand, including the carpal bones, nerves, and muscles relevant to the surgery. Amami explains that carpal tunnel syndrome occurs because the tunnel-like structure is so narrow that the median nerve gets squeezed. Coronet confirms her understanding, asking if they just need to do something with the flexiretinacker loom. Amami affirms this, stating that they only need to cut the part over the median nerve to relieve the pressure. Amami pauses, noting a complication. He points out a blood vessel, the superficial palmar arch, which lies directly in their path. He warns that if they damage it, the bleeding will make the surgery difficult, so they must be careful. He asks Yuno-san to grab the new tool he had made, the elevatorium. Amami explains that the elevatorium will go between the median nerve and the flexor retinaculum. He emphasizes the critical danger. If he accidentally cuts the median nerve, the king's paralysis will become even worse. The king listens, understanding the high stakes of the procedure. Amami explains that the tool will be placed directly under the ligament to shield the nerve from the scalpel. Suddenly, the room begins to rumble and swing. The king calmly notes that these tremors are frequent, but usually brief. Amami prudently decides to pause the surgery for a moment. After the tremor subsides, he observes that things have settled down and prepares to resume. A sudden, violent earthquake throws the entire surgical team into chaos. The ceiling cracks and splinters violently from the force of the impact. A massive, glowing object is seen crashing into the snowy landscape outside. Amami is thrown back, stunned by the force of the explosion. In the ensuing darkness, Amami asks if everyone is all right, realizing the conditions are no longer ideal. With the light source gone, they are left to wonder what to do next as the structure continues to groan around them. A single surgical tool lies on the dark, dusty floor. The operating room groans under immense pressure, sounding like it could collapse at any moment. Alec calls out to Amami, checking if he is okay. Amami, protected by a magical barrier, reports that he is fine for now and asks about the others. Alec shouts back that they all got clear, and with a fierce grin, asks if she should transform into a dragon to destroy the debris. Amami remains silent and focused. His hand is steady as he continues the incision, the view slightly obscured. He firmly tells Alec no, as he is in the middle of the surgery and needs her to wait. She agrees to stand by in case it gets dangerous. Shia apologizes for the interruption and reassures Amami that the earthquake was not his fault. A sudden jolt disrupts the procedure. Fia raises her staff, which gleams brightly, illuminating the dark, debris-filled room. She realizes that performing the surgery in the dark would be difficult and offers some light. She asks Amami if this will do, and he replies with a determined yes. An outside view shows the snow-covered castle has sustained significant damage. An assistant notices Amami's distress and asks what is wrong. Amami spots the fallen elevatorium on the floor. He admits that he dropped it during the quake. The other assistant realizes that disinfecting it now will be a challenge. Amami thinks about the tool's purpose, to go between the median nerve and the flexor retinaculum, protecting the nerve from the scalpel. The terrifying possibility of causing even worse paralysis and disability flashes through his mind. An assistant, her eyes wide with worry, asks Amami for direction. The king, lying on the operating table, speaks up, telling Amami-sensei that he has steeled himself for whatever happens. Amami wonders if the surgery can even proceed without the crucial tool. He knows there's no telling when the shaking will start again, and prolonged compression on the arm is not good. With renewed determination, Amami announces he will cut the flexor retinaculum without the elevatorium. Fia watches him, a worried expression on her face. The debris-filled room continues to settle with unsettling creaks. The ceiling collapses with a tremendous crash. Amami and his assistant look up in horror, exclaiming as the tremor hits again. Magic begins to swirl around Amami's hand. A brilliant beam of energy erupts from Fia's staff, pushing back the collapsing wreckage. The magic carves a safe space amidst the destruction. Sweating from the strain, Fia apologizes for her brief lapse in concentration. One of the assistants expresses shock, realizing Fia has been casting 2 spells at once. Fia explains that while one spell pushed aside the wreckage, she added another to stop the dam of debris. She admits the mana drain is tough but grits her teeth, promising to protect them. Fia tells the team she is going to give it her all. She urges them to do their part as well. With sweat on his brow, Amami declares they will restart the operation. One assistant confirms she is ready. The other assistant affirms that she understands. The king watches with a determined expression. Amami's mind races, acutely aware that he must not risk damaging the median nerve by inserting the scalpel too deeply. He decides to use the scalpel, with the blade reversed to maintain control. With the incision held open, he carefully begins to slice the ligament. A text box explains that traditional methods for this surgery used an elevatorium and round-edged scalpel, but newer, less invasive methods are now more common. Amami exhales, taking a brief pause from the intense work. Yuno-san gently wipes the sweat from Amami's brow, and he thanks her. Fia is shown sweating profusely as she holds her magical staff. An assistant points out to Fia that she is also sweating. Fia wipes the sweat from her cheek, telling them not to mind her. Amami turns his head slightly, asking Fia to please hang in there a bit longer. Fia grins through her exhaustion and tells him she's got it. Amami focuses intently on the task at hand. He continues making careful incisions with the reversed scalpel. An assistant watches the procedure with wide, focused eyes. Shia stands by, observing the delicate operation. The king endures the surgery, his eyes fixed forward. The surrounding debris continues to creak and shift. Amami announces he has successfully cut through the flexor retinaculum. The two assistants look on, one asking with a gulp if the structure they see is the median nerve. Amami explains that they can now close the wound using a horizontal mattress suture, having safely completed the surgery. The assistants let out a collective sigh of relief. Shia smiles gently, relieved the danger has passed. The king looks on in disbelief, asking if that was really it. Fia, still maintaining her spell, tells the king he may not feel the difference immediately. Amami grins, assuring the king that it will be fine and he should rest. The king observes the final stage of the surgery, closing the wound. Fia looks on, her duty almost complete. A wide shot shows the precarious state of the castle. A crowd of dwarves, including Coronet, watches from a distance. The castle erupts in a massive explosion of snow and timber. Two onlookers scream in terror, calling out for the king, Dazastal-sama, and everyone else. A powerful whoosh clears the air. Alec in her dragon form lands dramatically, carrying Amami, the king, and the assistants on her back. The king, holding up his bandaged hand, grins and asks if he kept them waiting. The dwarves begin to survey the damage to their town. The king tells his worried wife that no one was hurt, and that repairs will be a piece of cake. His wife and another dwarf press him, asking about the more important matter, his hand. They ask if the surgery for his hammer bane was a success. The king confirms with a simple, confident yeah. The king, standing with Amami's group, expresses his gratitude, saying he seems to be okay now. He thanks Amami again, saying he really owes him. Amami replies that there may be complications, but the king confirms he is fine. A text box provides a detailed medical explanation of pillar pain, a potential complication of carpal tunnel surgery. The entire group celebrates, with the king laughing and raising his healed hand. Alec, in her small dragon form, reminds the king to listen to Amami's advice. Coronet beams, asking Amami if it's great. Amami smiles broadly and agrees. Alec announces her departure, and Amami reminds her to be careful with Chloe-san. Shia flies up to the larger dragon, asking what's happening. Shia puts a finger to her lips, telling the dragon to be quiet because Fia is asleep. The dragon asks if she is asleep. Amami and a companion watch the departing dragons. The dragon, referred to as number 2, says it was watching the 6 stars lady. It concludes that maybe she's a good person. The king exclaims that he still cannot forge sacred tools. The group discusses the urgency, with the festival only 6 days away and the ominous fairy tale from Chloe weighing on their minds. Coronet approaches Amami and asks if it would be wrong to use regeneration magic on Fia-senpai's wound. Amami confesses that he thought about asking her too, but he still doesn't have a good grasp on magic in general. He considers the possibility that regeneration could undo their work by restoring the flexor retinaculum. He states his preference to avoid using healing magic if they can. The king stares intently at his bandaged hand. His son Hugh runs up, calling out to his dad. Hugh arrives with Chief Normim, who calls out to him. Hugh excitedly asks about his father's hammer bane, then shouts that the surgery was a success. He explains that Master taught him to mine mana at the Nox mine. The king and his wife react with shock. A flashback shows Hugh learning from a master at the mine. A bag is opened to reveal a trove of glittering mana crystals. The onlookers are stunned into silence, exclaiming in awe. The king looks at his son and asks why he did this. Chief Normim states that this is no time to be slow, as he saw the preparations for a smelting furnace in the castle workshop. He warns that one more big tremor will knock the castle down, making the workshop unusable. Alec suggests that making the sacred tool in the workshop might put a stop to the earthquakes. Normim agrees, speculating that the adamant's release of mana could be affecting the mineral veins. The king acknowledges the need to make the sacred tool quickly and tells his son to do his duty as king and help. His son Darzastal looks on with determination. The king orders Zafral to give the order to everyone, and they agree to start immediately. In a workshop, someone agrees that things are about to get busy. The dwarves work together, adding materials to a sizzling forge. Hugh brings more materials as another dwarf works at an anvil. The king operates a large bellows to heat the forge. The forge erupts with intense heat and sparks. The king continues to work the bellows. A glowing piece of metal is lifted from the crucible with tongs. The metal is plunged into a quenching liquid, causing a violent steamy reaction. The quenching process sends water splashing everywhere. The king tells the others he knows what he's doing and to not take too many impurities. The glowing metal is placed on the anvil with a loud clang. The finished hammers lie ready for use. The king, his son, and another dwarf work together, striking the metal with synchronized blows. The king's wife watches them, tears of pride in her eyes. Hugh hammers with a wide, excited grin. Chief Normim works with a determined smile. The king laughs heartily as he brings his hammer down. The sound of their work rings out across the land. The finished sacred tool rests on a workbench. The dwarves look on in amazement. They express their relief and gratitude, noting that with this, their promise will be fulfilled. The king's son thanks them again. He thanks Amami-sensei and his friends, but Amami says it was nothing. He then turns his attention to his father. He addresses his dad. The king and his son clasp hands in a powerful grip. The son looks his father in the eye and vows to repay this debt someday. The king tells him there is no debt, as he is his father and his son. A dwarf bursts in, telling the king that they are not the only ones who are early. He reports that the delegation from the Night Land has arrived. Inside a lavish carriage, a young man remarks on the perfect timing and declares that the Divine Spirit Festival can now begin. A woman with her hair in a bun approaches a large cage filled with bird-like creatures, announcing her arrival. One of the birds flies out of the cage, a message canister attached to its leg, as the woman watches it depart. A man with his hair tied back stands on a cold balcony, his breath visible in the air. A young man with light hair informs Ekres that a bird is coming from Fia. Ekres's eyes widen as she senses the approaching messenger. The king explains that a disturbance in the atmospheric mana prompted his early arrival. A group of dwarves shamefully welcome King Lugan, thanking him for coming despite their land's wretched state. King Lugan reassures them they are friends and urges them to begin the Divine Spirit Festival at once, expressing his worry. Chloe, wearing an ornate mask, identifies herself to her father, who is with Amami's group. Chloe's younger sister, also masked, cries out to her. A masked young man accompanying Chloe looks surprised and asks why she is here. Chloe's father acknowledges the difficult situation. He asks if the king's treatment is complete and if he can move about. He glances over at Amami and his companions. Amami is startled by the sudden attention. Chloe's father asks Amami if he is the rumored sensei and says he has something to ask him. He leans in close, inviting Amami to ride with him into Nox if he doesn't mind. Amami agrees and they set off in a carriage through the snow. Chloe's father removes his mask and recounts the long-ago dreams of the vampires who tried countless schemes to overcome the sun. He explains their desperation to be freed from the curse as Amami, Alec, and Coronet listen intently. He continues, saying that Amami gave them what felt like a solution. Alec, confused, asks what he means by something like a solution, while Amami looks on nervously. Chloe's father looks at Amami with intense gravity and asks if they can believe in him. Chloe angrily tells her father he is being rude to Amami, insisting that just being given a possibility is enough for her. Her father defends his question, stating it is important for them and for the still uncured King Darzastal. He explains that as a realist, he knows that hope can also turn to poison. Chloe's father waits for Amami's response. Amami apologizes, admitting with a heavy heart that he cannot guarantee a cure. Chloe's father acknowledges Amami's honest answer. He then calls out to Chloe. Chloe is stunned as her father tells her she is coming back to the Night Land. Fleur cheers, excited that her older sister is coming home. Chloe protests, confused by the sudden decision. Her father explains that as a parent, he cannot turn a blind eye to his child serving a man he doesn't trust. Chloe looks down, disheartened. Amami is visibly troubled by the turn of events. Coronet expresses her concern for Amami, while Alec observes that he has a thankless role. They continue on, approaching the entrance to a dark, snowy passage. One of the dwarves announces they have reached the entrance to the Nox mine and cautions them to be careful. Amami and the others look into the dark entrance. Alec and Coronet follow, their expressions serious. The group discovers their path is blocked by a massive rockfall. The dwarves worry that the sanctuary has been affected by the earthquake. Chloe's father orders everyone to move away, declaring that they must move the rocks immediately. He gathers energy in his hand, preparing to cast a spell. With a tremendous boom, the magic obliterates the rocks blocking their path. The group reacts in shock and awe as the rocks disintegrate. Shia calmly identifies the phenomenon as vibration magic. Amami asks if it was vibration magic, and Shia confirms it. She explains to Chloe that the night land folk can manipulate sounds and vibrations that others cannot hear. Amami turns to Chloe and asks if she can use that magic too. Chloe bashfully admits that she can, but not as skillfully as her father. Alec smiles, asking Amami if he just had another brain wave. Amami excitedly explains his idea, using vibration magic to check inside people's bodies. Chloe is horrified by the idea, misinterpreting it as a violent act. Amami frantically denies her assumption, though he also seems to be considering a related idea. Alec comments that it's too cramped to go dragon-sized and suggests they clear the path. The dwarves and the rest of the group begin moving the heavy rocks by hand. Amami, Alec, and Coronet also help clear the debris. Chloe and her father work in tandem, channeling their vibration magic. Fleur watches with delight as her family works together. Their combined power turns the rest of the rockfall to dust. They see that there is still a significant amount of debris ahead. Chloe's father apologizes to King Lugan, but the king tells him not to fret. However, he expresses concern about the time, the stirring mana, and the impending lament of God. Another violent tremor shakes the mine, catching everyone by surprise. The ground rumbles violently beneath them. One of the dwarves expresses confusion at the strange phenomenon. They discover that the earthquake has created a massive hole, swallowing the rest of the pesky rocks and clearing their path. Chloe's father smiles, suggesting that Nox itself seems to want them to stop the lament of God. Amami asks if everyone is all right, and they confirm they are fine. Fleur excitedly calls out to her father and sister, declaring she will be the first to the sanctuary as she runs ahead. Fleur stumbles as the ground ahead of her gives way. She is silhouetted against a blinding light pouring in from the mine's exit. Her father screams in terror, realizing it is the sun, and sprints towards Fleur. Chloe leaps forward to protect her younger sister from the sunlight. She cries out in agony as the sunlight makes contact with her skin. Amami screams Chloe's name in shock. Her father also yells her name, his face a mask of terror. Fleur tearfully apologizes to her sister as Amami rushes to check on her. Chloe covers her face, groaning, but manages to speak to Amami. Chloe looks up, her face unharmed, and says she is totally fine. Amami reacts with complete disbelief. Chloe wonders aloud if she is now immune. Amami grins, explaining that while it's too soon to be certain, it is possible the tortillas he provided have worked. Tears of relief and joy roll down Chloe's cheeks. She breaks down, bowing deeply to Amami in overwhelming gratitude. With tears in his eyes, Chloe's father thanks Amami and apologizes. Amami reassures him, but cautiously reiterates that he can't be sure she's fully cured yet. Chloe's father cheerfully apologizes for holding everyone up and announces it's time to go. The rest of the group, including Alec, Coronet, and the dwarves, are all smiles. They proceed down the now-cleared mine tunnel. A small, winged creature resembling a moth person hovers in the tunnel. It lands directly on Amami's nose, startling him. The tiny fairy then whirls and flies off deeper into the mine. Amami panics, asking Coronet if she saw the fairy, and she confirms it. Alec calmly explains that it was a fairy, creatures that are drawn to places with abundant mana. One of the dwarves adds that they are a dangerous bunch and presumes the cave-in buried it. Another dwarf announces that they are not far from the sanctuary now. Amami and Coronet gaze up at a large traditional shrine built inside the cave. A sign identifies the structure as the Hurasaka shrine. Amami's heart pounds in his chest as he stares at the shrine, a feeling of recognition dawning on him. Alec notices his reaction and asks if something is wrong. Amami, in turn, asks if she usually sees buildings like this. Alec replies that while she doesn't know much about it, it's certainly unique and the first of its kind she has seen. Amami asks if he can take a closer look at the shrine, promising to be careful since it's an old building. The dwarf leader calls for everyone to get ready, while Chloe's father calls her over to speak with her. He asks Chloe if she can recite a prayer he taught her long ago, and she eagerly agrees. The leader declares that they will now hold the Divine Spirit Festival. Amami's companions join the Nightland folk in prayer before the shrine. The dwarves and the rest of the assembly also bow their heads in prayer. A dwarf stands on the shrine's platform before the crowd, preparing for the ritual. He holds a large stone hammer that is crackling with immense magical energy. Amami watches in amazement, marveling at the sheer amount of mana radiating from the hammer. Chloe recites an ancient chant in a foreign tongue. The dwarf slams the hammer down, activating a glowing magic circle on the shrine floor. The impact triggers another earthquake, causing Amami's group to cry out in alarm. Chloe continues to chant loudly as the ritual intensifies. The dwarf strikes the ground again, pouring more energy into the ritual. A final powerful impact echoes through the cavern. The group is shocked as the shaking abruptly stops, wondering what happened. Chloe's father notes that the torrent of mana is subsiding. The dwarf and Chloe declare that with the ritual complete, God has been consoled and the disorder has been fixed. As the sun crests the horizon, the leader officially concludes the Divine Spirit Festival. A bearded dwarf, Darzastel, excitedly asks Amami if he can truly fix his wife Paula's scar. Around a table, Amami confirms he can perform the surgery, though it will mean cutting her forehead again. Paula expresses hesitation, but her husband encourages her to accept the offer. Darzastel tells Paula that while she is the best wife in the world even with the scar, he doesn't want to live with the regret of having caused it, and begs her to have the surgery. Fia apologizes, suggesting they should proceed if it will make the scar look better. Paula and her husband quickly absolve her of any blame. Amami reassures Fia, telling her that using magic to stop the bleeding was the correct emergency measure. Fia listens to Amami's words. Ekres agrees that it was the right call, though not a complete solution. Moved, Fia clasps her hands and asks Yuito if she can watch the surgery, promising not to cause any trouble. Amami reassures Fia that she saved them, while Alec reacts to Fia's choice of words. Fia grins, pleased that she will be allowed to observe. Paula lies on the operating table, fitted with a surgical cap. Amami addresses his team, which includes Korone and Shia, as they prepare for the procedure. He announces that he will use a permanent marker to plan the incision. Shia asks if he's really going to use that tool to decide where to cut. Amami apologizes to Paula and begins to draw on her forehead. He concentrates on the details, ensuring each line is about 5 m long and the angles are between 60 and 90 degrees. Amami carefully scribbles the surgical guide onto her skin. The completed zigzag pattern is visible on Paula's forehead. An assistant wearing a mask asks Amami if he's doing a zigzag pattern this time. Korone expresses concern that cutting a zigzag will make the scar even more conspicuous. Amami explains that this technique, called W-plasty, involves purposefully making a zigzag suture line to improve the appearance of the scar. A detailed text explains the principles of W-plasty, a surgical technique to make scars less noticeable by redesigning a straight scar into a zigzag shape. The assistants are impressed by the explanation. Amami asks Paula if she is okay with the procedure. Paula confidently entrusts herself to his care. Fia thanks Amami. Amami prepares to scrub in, asking Korone and another assistant to help with disinfecting. Fia correctly intuits that the surgical outfits are meant to prevent unwanted things from getting into the wound. Amami confirms her observation. Fia asks if there's a spare surgical outfit for her. Korone disinfects the marked area on Paula's forehead. Amami instructs Chloe to place a drape over the area and use her magic to reduce the pain. Chloe and her fellow assistant look on with focus. Chloe agrees and places the surgical drape over Paula's forehead. She then channels her magic, preparing to numb the area for the procedure. Amami injects an anesthetic, explaining to Chloe that its vasoconstrictor effects are needed to control bleeding. He notes that their lidocaine supply is low and they'll need to test her magic for anesthesia in the future. With preparations complete, he announces the start of the cicatricial contracture plastic surgery. He requests a 15C round-edged scalpel from Korone, who confirms. Amami announces he is commencing the incision. He carefully traces the perimeter of the scar along the lines he drew. He pauses to check on Paula. Paula confirms she feels no pain. Reassured, he continues the delicate work. As the incision deepens, blood begins to drip. Amami calls out to his assistant, Yuno-san. Her heart pounds nervously as she responds. He instructs her to wipe away the blood with gauze. She quickly complies. Amami thanks his assistant and tells her to continue wiping away any further bleeding. He proceeds with the incision. The other assistants, including Chloe and Shia, watch with intense focus. With the incision complete, Amami announces the next step. He asks Korone for toothed forceps and ophthalmic scissors to peel off the hypertrophic scar. He explains he will lift the tissue with the forceps. Then he will cut it away with the curved scissors. The assistants watch with wide, focused eyes as Amami begins the delicate process. He lifts the edge of the scar tissue with forceps. He begins to snip it away with the scissors. He pulls and tugs to separate it from the underlying tissue. With careful tugs and rips, the scar tissue is steadily peeled away. Finally, the entire piece is removed. Amami lets out a quiet sigh of relief, the most difficult part now over. An assistant's heart pounds as she watches the procedure. Amami observes that the oozing of blood is inconspicuous and decides it's time for the dermal suture, asking Korone for the necessary tools. Korone acknowledges the request. Amami explains that to minimize scarring, he will perform a dermal suture, stitching the tissue underneath the epidermis. A diagram illustrates the layers of skin and shows how the suture starts from the back side of the dermis. He begins the suturing process. He explains that he is now working on the other side, going from the dermis toward the subcutaneous fat. Amami meticulously continues the suturing process. He checks that the threads are intertwined correctly and emerging in the same direction. With a series of tugs, he pulls the wound together. He performs a double ligation to secure the stitch. Amami continues his precise work, creating a knot. He explains that he will pull it vertically along the scar line to bury the knot. He tightens the stitch. He snips the thread, completing the first stitch. Amami explains that he's lining up the peaks and valleys of the zigzag. An assistant marvels at how perfectly the wound is fitting together. He cautions Korone that with this technique, one must be careful not to pull the thread too tight, and she understands. He then prepares to repeat the process. With the dermal suture finished, the wound is already much less noticeable. An assistant notes how inconspicuous the wound already looks and asks if there's anything else to do. Amami confirms there is, announcing that he will now sew up the epidermis with a thin suture. He explains that he only needs to suture the middle of each section, since the dermal suture closed the wound so well. The suture is a very fine 7/0 nylon, with a diameter of only 0.05. Amami begins the final layer of stitches. He carefully tightens the stitch. He has an assistant wipe the area clean. Amami announces he will now repeat the process. He works methodically, placing each stitch with precision. His assistants, including Shia, watch his hands move with focused intensity. The epidermal suture is complete and the surgery is done. One of the assistants exclaims in amazement that you can't even tell a wound was there and that it's fixed far better than regeneration magic could have. An onlooker comments that it's true and they will tell Sol not to worry since there was a better way than regeneration. Fia tells Amami that his work is incredibly interesting and asks to pick his brain later. He then tells Paula that he's removing the drape and she can check the results in a mirror. Paula agrees. Paula stares at her reflection, the fresh, fine stitches barely visible on her forehead. Fia nervously watches her reaction. Amami explains that the stitches will be removed in 7 days, and in 6 months, the scar should be completely unnoticeable. Overwhelmed with emotion, Paula thanks Amami, exclaiming that the bulge from the old scar is completely gone. She eagerly asks to go show her husband. Amami agrees but advises her to rest for a while first. The waiting party, including Ekres and Paula's son, turns as the door opens. Amami and a nervous Paula emerge, with Amami apologizing for the wait. Darzastel looks on with worried anticipation. Darzastel rushes to his wife, flipping up her bangs to see her forehead. He is stunned by the result. Overjoyed, he declares that they owe Amami another debt of gratitude and announces a celebratory party. Amami beams, happy with the outcome. Overcome with happiness, Paula weeps with joy. Behind her, Amami and his smiling team, Alec, Korone, Chloe and Shia, share in the triumphant moment. At the celebration, Shia explains that the palumbu dish has been boiled, and Lintvium adds that the fruit is sweet even when raw. Meanwhile, the dwarves are eager to start the festivities and call for a toast. Alec points out that Paula shouldn't drink, and Amami agrees. Darzastal is incredulous, protesting that it's a celebration. Amami apologetically explains that drinking alcohol so soon after surgery can cause the wound to bleed and swell. Darzastal is shocked by this news. Ekres consoles him, saying it's good to cut back sometimes and that they brought plenty of palumbu as a souvenir. King Lugan thanks Amami for his consideration, though he seems disappointed, and Alec teases that Darzastal and his son are avid drinkers. Seizing an opportunity, Amami announces that with all the palumbu, they should be able to make whiskey. Darzastal perks up at the mention of whiskey. The dwarves eagerly ask if he can make the strong liquor from palumbu. Amami explains that there are different kinds of whiskey, like bourbon which uses corn as its main ingredient. The dwarves get excited about the prospect of strong liquor. The dwarves start to argue about who gets to make it. Amami diffuses the tension by suggesting they each make their own whiskey in a friendly competition. The dwarves eagerly accept the challenge. Amami explains how different ingredients and storage barrels can alter the whiskey's flavor. He smiles and offers to teach them the basics. The father and son duo immediately start a friendly rivalry, both excited to begin. Ekres tells Amami that he illuminates them with the light of possibilities, admitting he had jumped to conclusions and doubted him before. Amami dismisses it as a mistake and tells him to think nothing of it. Ekres reflects that their people had been treated with suspicion for so long until they discovered palumbu. Fia adds that things are different now, and they can turn their future into something better if they wish. For the sake of that better future, Ekres makes a request. He wants Chloe to continue studying under Amami-sensei. He asks Amami to take his daughter into his care. A flustered Amami processes the request. Amami agrees to the arrangement. The dwarves, impatient to celebrate, are reminded that the food is getting cold. King Darzastal takes the lead, proposing a grand toast to their continued lives, to Amami-sensei, and to his wife Paula's beautiful forehead. With mugs held high, the entire group joins together in a joyous and resounding cheer, celebrating their newfound hope and friendship. A narrator recalls their father's obsession with a new camera in 1966 Japan, always taking pictures of the family. After a bountiful harvest, they prepare an offering to thank the gods. The father enthusiastically tells a young woman named Chio to give a big smile for a photo. She recounts that a typhoon came through soon after, and her father believed the gods had taken the shrine and offerings. Amami listens intently, asking if it was a severe typhoon. The woman's memory of the decades-old event is vague, and she apologizes for not having more details for him. The shrine sign clearly reads Hurasaka Shrine. Alec asks why he's so interested in the building, and Amami wonders to himself how it could be here. Ekres and his companion observe Amami's reaction. Ekres theorizes that the festivals have ancient origins and that historical records may have been deliberately left behind. A companion wonders aloud if Amami's ancestors could have a connection to the shrine's beginnings. Amami is left pondering the possibility. Both Amami and Ekres admit they don't have a clue. The inscription clearly reads Showa 33. Amami stares in disbelief at the familiar writing. Amami explains to a questioning Alec that the date is 1958, which doesn't align with the ancient history they know. He considers the possibility that the shrine and maybe himself were shifted through time, which could mean a chance to return home. Alec asks if he can read the letters. His companions confirm they are unable to read the strange script. Amami explains that the writing tells who carved the wood and when. His companions find the letters peculiar and admit they've never seen anything like them. Alec observes him and asks if this discovery makes him want to go back to his homeland. Amami is taken aback by the direct question. Korone and the others watch him, waiting for his response. Alec watches him intently. He looks toward the shrine, lost in thought and unable to speak. Amami resolves that he can't go home yet, as there's still too much for him to do here. Alec seems to understand his decision. She agrees and they decide to head back. A small fairy lands on Amami's shoulder, much to his surprise. Alec comments on how overly friendly the creature is. One of their companions beams, finding the fairy adorable. The fairy explains she was scared, but is glad to have found a kind person to talk to. Amami is stunned that the fairy spoke. Suddenly another voice calls out, leaving Amami and Alec confused. Amami is shocked as a group of small gnomes shuffles into view. An elder among them clears his throat and asks to speak. Amami leans down, striking an earnest listening pose that surprises the elder. The elder Zeppa introduces himself and thanks Amami, explaining that the recent earthquake saved them from being buried alive. Amami confirms that they're all fine, but seems to have more questions. Zeppa quotes the fairy Nito, who observed a human without mana traveling peacefully with other races and wished to be like him. She has therefore resolved to ask Amami to take her with him. Amami is shocked by the request. Amami questions if Nito really means him, and Zeppa confirms it. Zeppa explains that he is tired, and their troop is disbanding after settling down with the Tomt folk. He wonders what will become of everyone after they go their separate ways. However, the thought of not being able to look after Nito, the youngest, is what truly gives him nightmares. Amami asks if he'll be alright being separated from his grandchild. Zeppa clarifies that Nito isn't his grandchild, they are just a group of displaced folk who came together. Nito asks Amami if he is a merchant. She explains she's seen human merchants swaggering through perilous forests and assumed he must have incredible money power. Nito asks what power lets him stand shoulder to shoulder with fierce races if not money. Amami clarifies his companions are actually very good people and that his skill is healing injuries and sickness. Nito is shocked, asking how he can perform healing without mana. Korone proudly declares that her master is amazing. Amami explains that it's a power anyone can learn. Alec interjects, warning Nito that it's not easy and to forget it if it's just a whim. Nito seems to make her decision as she looks at Amami. She declares that she has decided. She produces a gold coin, explaining it's her savings which she offers as a deposit. She earnestly asks Amami to take her with him as his apprentice. Amami is taken aback by her earnestness. Nito looks at him with hopeful determination. Amami reflects that she is just like him and that it would be a lie to say losing his way home doesn't bother him. But he resolves that the only way to go is forward and warmly welcomes Nito aboard. He refuses her gold coin, stating that her commitment is enough. Nito is moved to tears by his acceptance. Nito grins widely, overjoyed by his answer. She flies around the group, yelping with joy. Amami apologizes to his companions for making another unilateral decision, but they are supportive. Darzastal begins his tendon exercises. He clenches his fist. He stretches his hand open. He curls his fingers. Darzastal's son tells his father that Tasjum is no longer viable, and they must focus on mining adamant. He points out that the Great Calamity has left more people dead in their coffins than alive. He angrily asks his father if he understands the fix they are in. His father listens with a grim expression. The king argues that their mana mining is what they do and asks how everyone will pay for their daily bread. The son laments that his father's grit has become pig-headedness and says goodbye. Amami asks Darzastal how he's feeling since the stitches were removed, and Darzastal admits he's not used to rehab. Amami encourages him, explaining that keeping up the massage and exercises will gradually make it better. Darzastal expresses his immense gratitude, saying he'll keep thanking him for his hand, for Pala, the festival, and his old man. Amami smiles warmly. Amami says he is leaving because he is worried about the world tree. Darzastal warns him to be careful in the snow. Ekres explains to Chloe that as Nightlanders, they cannot see her off since it is daytime. Chloe agrees to give his regards to Queen Melina. He hands her a letter, telling her to give it to the old-timer as a form of business communication. A young girl named Flor asks if Chloe is leaving, sad that she'll be gone. Ekres reassures Flor that they will get to see Chloe again. Chloe explains that she is working hard under Amami's guidance to achieve something tremendous. She encourages the others to do their best back in the Night Land as well. Lintvium checks to make sure no one has forgotten anything. Amami gets Alec's attention. He asks if they can all ride together now that they don't have to be as vigilant. He reasons it would be a waste to have two carriages and suggests using one for luggage. A young dwarf girl is pleased with how things are progressing. She asks Hugh if he is really going back to the World Tree, letting him know he can stay. Hugh explains that he is learning from his master and still has much more to learn. Hugh declares that he will definitely become a proper craftsperson and is returning to the World Tree to learn how. His mother tearfully says she is proud of him. She hugs him, telling him to take care and come home from time to time. Darzastal asks the master to take care of Hugh. Hugh asks his father what he meant to say. Darzastal recalls his son's words from their argument and admits that Hugh was right. He looks at his son and sincerely apologizes. The king reassures his son, telling him that he's doing a fine job and isn't getting anything wrong. He tells him to swallow his pride and ask for help next time, and not to be so pig-headed. Darzastal is moved to tears by his father's words. The king declares it's a competition to see who can make the tastiest whiskey. Darzastal tells his father to talk it up while he can, promising to send him an out-of-this-world drop. They bid each other farewell. The carriage takes flight, with its passengers waving from the windows. The dwarves cheer and wave goodbye from the ground. The two flying creatures carry the carriage into the snowy sky. Darzastal and Pala watch until they are gone. The king rallies the remaining dwarves, telling them to get to work on mining, repairs, rehab, and whiskey. The fairies nervously ask the children if Amami really performed surgery on their parents. The children and their parents happily confirm that it's true, and it's why they're all alive. Chloe happily recounts how Amami cured her with tacos, much to the fairies' surprise. Amami's companions agree that while his healing sounds scary, one must do everything they can to cure people. The girls look forward to their adventures at the World Tree, wondering what they'll do there. Someone thanks a young woman for her help with the construction. She uses a pulley system to hoist materials. The young woman leaps into the air. She scales the wall with incredible agility. A man thanks her for climbing up so quickly, as if she were skating on ice. It is reported that the hospital construction is going smoothly. An elf with glasses reports that parts of the new building can already be used, but there's a problem. The queenly figure notes that without Normim Sama, they can't reach maximum speed, and matters concerning Amami must wait. She wonders if they are on their way back yet, hoping everything stays uneventful while Amami is away. A harpy woman arrives with fruit, hoping to thank Amami for fixing her child's elbow. Lintvium informs her that Amami is away at the moment, helping people in other parts. The harpy is surprised to hear he's gone. Lintvium asks about the gloomy-looking lady accompanying her. The harpy explains that her neighbor heard about Amami sense and desperately wants his help to be cured. Lintvium looks on with concern. Lintvium asks if there is something wrong with her. The woman collapses, begging for help and revealing that she is a harpy who can no longer fly. A man with glasses visits the Cursus Avi's postal company, explaining that he needs to restock his birds as they've been getting weaker and fewer are returning. A postal worker agrees to help the man, telling him it's no problem at all and leads him inside. The man with the glasses expresses his thanks. The postal worker tells his guest that since they've gotten involved with the 6 stars, they need detailed information, making this a real help. He confides that he can't stand the mage's monopoly and believes demi-humans would be willing to join them to dismantle the system. The man is led into the aviary. The bespectacled man smirks, thinking to himself what a wonderfully carefree fool his host is. He vows to make full use of the unsuspecting worker. The aviary is filled with birds, flapping their wings and moving about their enclosures. A bird with a message tube attached to its leg lets out a sharp cry. The start of a new episode is announced, medical interview. A crowd of elves and other residents warmly welcome Amami back. Amami, with a slime creature on his head, happily announces their return. An elf woman reports that King Darzastal and Nox are doing well, imagining them merrily working away. Amami immediately asks if anyone got sick or injured while he was away. His companions tell him he should rest, questioning if he's under a curse that makes him die if he doesn't work. An elf queen figure chuckles, telling Amami not to worry as no one currently needs healing. Amami expresses his relief. A woman with glasses asks if Amami isn't going to rest yet. Amami asks to see the progress on the hospital, and a dwarf companion eagerly agrees. Amami asks Alec if he's coming too, despite being tired. Alec confirms he's not really tired. Amami gasps in awe at the sight of the newly constructed hospital wing. He is amazed by the interior, which is set up like a large lecture hall. The dwarven builders proudly ask him what he thinks. Amami praises the builders, telling them they did a great job while he was away. The woman with glasses points out other things that were made for him. Amami sees a table laid out with various pieces of laboratory equipment. Alec looks at the glassware and asks if it's another tool for germs. Amami explains that it's a measuring flask, a tool for measuring fixed volumes, and that they'll use it to make saline. Saline is defined as an aqueous solution of sodium chloride with various medical applications. Coronet and another girl are thrilled at the thought of finally having a supply of water that doesn't sting. Amami holds up a set of scales, explaining that he had them made to figure out weights and measures which will allow them to do the proper calculations. Master Norman and his team proudly accept the thanks, telling Amami to double-check their work. Lintvium and another woman enter the room as Amami agrees to check the tools. Coronet greets her mother, Lintvium, who welcomes her home. Coronet asks her mother who she has brought with her. Lintvium asks Yuito to examine the young girl, who bows timidly as Amami stammers his agreement. Amami and his companions stand together, ready to observe the patient. The girl stands apart from the group, stating that she will try to fly. She glances back at the group, shyly covering her face. Amami looks on with a concerned expression, telling her to start when she's ready. The girl dashes over to Amami's side. She whispers to Amami, who listens intently. Amami relays to the group that she gets shy in front of crowds. He then turns back to the girl, suggesting they find a different spot. Amami leads the girl to a secluded clearing, telling her no one comes here. She thanks him. The girl crouches, preparing for takeoff. She spreads her large, feathered wings, ready to fly. Coronet and Alec watch from their hiding place in the bushes. The girl takes to the air as Amami watches in surprise, exclaiming that she's flying. She strains, sweating and gritting her teeth as she flaps her wings. The girl collapses onto the ground, exhausted as Amami looks on. Amami concludes that since she can flap her wings, the problem must lie elsewhere. Panting, the girl explains that she's gradually stopped being able to fly properly and has also been staying up late. Amami picks up on her last comment, asking about her staying up late. The girl explains that she paints, but her favorite stationery store is closed, forcing her to use unfamiliar materials, which has caused her to stay up late and become worn out. Amami is impressed and says he'd love to see her pictures. However, he tells her that he doesn't think her tiredness is directly related to her inability to fly, which shocks her. A small fairy explains that she can fly because she's little, prompting Amami to consider that larger beings need more mana. Amami's question about whether she's gotten bigger lately causes the girl to flinch. Amami asks if the fairy meant big like Alec. Alec explains that harpies don't change form like she does and that her ability to fly is due to her immense mana. Amami speculates that perhaps the girl can't fly simply because she's gained some weight. The harpy girl is completely stunned by Amami's suggestion. Amami tells the girl that if weight gain is the problem, she'll need to lose some, and asks Coronet to do a preliminary exam. Coronet introduces herself to the girl, Lupco, and prepares to ask her some questions. Coronet begins the medical interview, asking Lupco roughly when she stopped being able to fly. A text box explains the purpose and components of a medical interview, such as gathering a patient's history and complaints. Lupco explains that she only noticed recently, but since she's been indoors painting a lot, it could have been going on for a while. Coronet processes this information, realizing the issue could have started longer ago than Lupco thinks. Coronet asks Lupco if she has any idea why she might have gained weight, besides a lack of exercise. Lupco ecstatically describes a delicious new dragon dish, tacos, that she finds irresistible. Alec comments on the unexpected downside of the delicious tacos. Amami sheepishly acknowledges that they're too yummy. Alec suggests that to shed pounds, Lupco could skip a meal and go for runs. The thought of this regimen makes Lupco cry out in horror. Lupco explains that she helps at a fruit store during the day, where she also gets fruit to eat. Amami agrees that Alec's suggestion isn't a good approach, stressing the importance of both diet and exercise. Alec asks what Lupco should do then, as Lupco looks on worriedly. Amami tells Lupco what he wants her to do first of all. He simply tells her to sleep. Lupco questions Amami's advice, reminding him that he said sleep wasn't directly related to her problem. Amami explains that lack of sleep in humans leads to lower secretion of growth hormone, which in turn lowers basal metabolism and makes it harder to lose weight. His companions are confused by the terms growth hormone and basal metabolism. Amami explains that hormones regulate the body's internal functions and growth hormone helps children grow and improves metabolism. A diagram illustrates the location of the pituitary gland in the brain, explaining that growth hormone is secreted from its anterior lobe. He continues, explaining that basal metabolism is the energy we need just to live, and it goes down when growth hormone decreases. A text box defines basal metabolism as the energy required for vital activities like breathing and maintaining body temperature. Lupco worries as she understands that with a low basal metabolism, her body can't use up all the energy from the food she eats. Chloe summarizes that, in other words, not getting enough sleep will cause weight gain even without overeating. Amami confirms this and adds that there's another factor to consider. He reveals that lack of sleep also affects other hormones, leading to an increased desire to eat. A flashback shows Lupco happily eating tacos. Lupco has a horrifying realization that her taco obsession might be caused by her lack of sleep. Amami laughs, clarifying that it's not entirely down to sleep, but it is a contributing factor. Amami explains that lack of sleep decreases leptin, which suppresses appetite, and increases ghrelin, which stimulates it, creating a double whammy for weight gain. A text box defines leptin and ghrelin, hormones that control appetite and are produced in fat cells in the stomach, respectively. Lupco looks distressed as Coronet takes notes. Amami reminds everyone that diet and exercise are also important, but he's speaking from human standards. Alec calls Amami out for not sleeping enough himself, telling him he's on thin ice. Amami promises he'll be careful. Lupco expresses her relief, having feared she had a nasty disease, when it seems to be a simple case of needing sleep, fewer tacos, and exercise. Amami agrees, suggesting they give that their best shot first, though weight gain might not be the only cause. Lupco looks dejected at the thought of giving up tacos, finding the diet to be a bitter pill. Amami reassures her that they will help, and suggests they first focus on food by making a weight-watching meal together. Lupco eagerly agrees to the plan. Amami, Coronet, and another girl smile, happy to help. The scene overlooks the beautiful, magically constructed bridge and trees of their home. A winged figure welcomes a bishop to the postal company, who apologizes for the intrusion. The bishop Arch states that an important message should have arrived for him from his friends. A postal worker leads the bishop inside. Another worker bursts in, panicking that Arch, one of the 6 stars, is here. The bespectacled man realizes Arch is probably after the message he's involved with. He decides to make himself scarce and leaves the follow-up work to his accomplice. The postal worker is left behind, nervously chewing on his fingers. The postal worker nervously greets Arch, who is now waiting in a sitting room. The worker sweats, knowing this is an important facility and that its staff takes pride in their work. Arch explains that he's waiting while they conduct a thorough search to rule out the possibility that a letter to him has been lost. The worker says he'll leave him in peace, but Arch's intense stare stops him. Arch tells the worker to wait, questioning why he's here when he was told the room would be empty. In order to leave no stone unturned, Arch declares he will also check the bird the worker is holding. The worker shrieks and tries to run, but Arch's power explodes from the birdcage. Arch's hair and body blaze with intense energy. He leaps forward with incredible speed. Arch violently apprehends the postal worker, his power erupting around them and scattering the birds. Blazing with power, Arch demands that the worker is going to tell him everything. Shia approaches Alec, calling her Fia Senpai. She asks Alec what she plans to do from now on at the World Tree. Shia states that Alec's supposed role as a hostage is just a facade. Alec replies that she is keeping tabs on Amami, and asks if Shia thinks there is some kind of scheme going on. Shia admits that at first, she was afraid Alec would resort to force. Alec quietly listens to Shia. Alec states her belief that there isn't a single person in the world whose death should be a cause for joy, and that this is a serious business. She knows what would happen to humans if healing magic didn't just belong to them. Amami explains that Yuito's medical science is the real deal, saving lives where magic can't, and it's too interesting to not want to get closer and find out more. Shia realizes that's why Alec is hanging around him. She asks if leaving Amami alone would conflict with Alec's patriotism. Alec flips a coin, deciding to see what happens, but adds that when heads is the winning side, no one prays for tails. Shia watches her, taking in her words. Amami cheerfully suggests they give dieting a good go now that they know some tricks for slimming down. Lupco trudges along, unenthusiastically contemplating her first ever diet. She wishes the stationery store would open again so she could get to bed earlier. She looks up in surprise at the open door of the stationery shop. Lupco cries out in delight, happy that the stationer is back. The stationer smiles, telling her he's glad to be at her service again. A man asks his accomplice who was just there, and is told it was only a customer. The stationer angrily asks if his accomplice read the letter, fuming that a festival is being held without them, and calling it unforgivable. A group of hooded figures listens, as their leader defiantly states that they can do as they please. The stationer smirks, resolving that they will do as they please too. A clamor echoes from a large stone amphitheater, which is packed with a diverse and chattering crowd. Amami looks out, amazed, remarking that despite the short notice, it's a full house. Alec observes that the place is packed for the open lecture. An audience member says they are all fascinated to see what Amami will teach them. Amami thanks everyone for coming and announces the start of the lecture. Korone cheers enthusiastically in response. Amami announces that his trial run lecture will be about the correct and healthy way to lose weight. The crowd murmurs in surprise at the topic of dieting. One man is pleased, saying this will be a great help to him. Another man suggests simply skipping meals and running until exhaustion. Alec interjects, stating that his suggestion is not a good one. Amami draws a diagram on a blackboard showing the relationship between exercise, food, and sleep. He explains that these three things are what's important for dieting, emphasizing that sleep is every bit as important as the others. The audience reacts with confusion to his statement. A burly man with an eye patch asks what to do if you're too swamped with work to sleep, suggesting a focus on just food and exercise. Amami agrees that's an option for the time being, but still urges everyone to try and get enough sleep. Shia asks what Amami will teach about exercise and food. Amami explains that they'll look at exercise next, and that proper sleep helps prevent weight from rebounding. Chloe asks what he means by rebounding. Amami explains it's when you work hard to lose weight, only to go right back to your old weight again. The audience trembles at the thought of rebounding. An audience member laments that despite their hard work cutting down on food, they sometimes get fat again. Amami explains that when you're only careful about food, you lose muscle, which causes your basal metabolism to drop. Amami states that muscle accounts for a huge share of basal metabolism. An elf in the audience realizes that to lose weight naturally through basal metabolism, it's important to exercise. The audience understands that a drop in basal metabolism can lead to difficulty losing weight and rebounding. A young boy asks what they should be careful about with food, now that he understands sleep and exercise. Amami explains that the three major nutrients, carbohydrates, protein, and fats, are particularly related to weight. He concludes that it's important to have moderate amounts of all of them, avoiding too much or too little of any single one. An audience member grimaces at the thought of an unbalanced diet, like only eating meat. Chloe looks concerned as she hears that an unbalanced diet is no good and can lead to other diseases. A young girl named Lim raises her hand, confused, asking what the three major nutrients are. Amami starts to give examples of nutrients and other things to be aware of, but then pauses. He realizes that since there are many different races at the World Tree, it would be better to have individual sessions to create personalized diet plans. Amami concludes his lecture with an encouraging message to diet the right way without overdoing it. The burly man from before seems inspired, vowing to cut back on his drinking a little. The crowd erupts in applause, thanking him and declaring it's the way to get a healthy body. As Amami bows, one of his companions asks Alec if it's really fine for him to be spreading this kind of knowledge. Alec muses that since Yuito said this was the first lecture of its kind, she supposes it's fine. Korone cheerfully wishes her master good night and closes the door. Amami places his small companion in its basket for the night. An exhausted Amami gets into bed. The door to his room clicks open. Amami is jolted awake by a sudden thump. He's stunned to see Alec, dressed for sleep, sitting on his bed. He stammers out her name as she playfully squishes his cheek. Alec leans in close, reminding Amami of his promise to let her ask him all kinds of questions. She tells a flustered Yuito that she's tired of waiting. Amami, blushing and wide-eyed, asks what she wants to know. Alec explains that long ago, before healing magic, humans were discriminated against, enslaved, and massacred by countless demi-human races. Amami's heart pounds as he stares in shock, the revelation hitting him hard. A tear rolls down Amami's cheek as he admits he didn't know. Alec's eye is shown, watching his reaction. Alec says she had a feeling he didn't know, but that ignorance isn't a good enough excuse. Amami gulps, understanding the gravity of the situation, especially when lives are at stake. She explains she was born and raised in the boonies where there were no majors, a place so desolate one wouldn't believe it was a human land. Alec recounts that her village was burned down 3 times, the first by her own people, and the next 2 by the low-life jerks who lorded it over them. She tells him to listen, and he stares wide-eyed in horror. Alec clenches her fist, explaining that healing magic is a deterrent and a lifeline for humans, not about money or vested interests. She looks down at him, saying he is looking to sever that lifeline. She asks if his conscience doesn't pang now that he knows the truth, leaving Amami speechless. Amami sits up and admits that yes, of course it does. Alec asks if talking about treatment and its methods without including the humans' lands isn't a bit of a contradiction. Amami admits that he knows his conduct is more than a little willful. But even so, he declares that he still wants to save the lives that are right in front of him. He continues that while it may be self-righteous, he doesn't want to abandon lives through self-deception. Amami says that while it may be a meaningless sentiment to her, everyone at the World Tree wants to know about healing because they know about pain and suffering. He states his belief that at least at the World Tree, there isn't a single soul who would want to hurt someone. A flashback shows a young, battered Alec screaming that the second time, it was humans who set fire to a demi-human village, questioning how they can be trusted. A younger, tear-streaked Alec glares defiantly. In the present, Alec says it's true that trusting people can sometimes get you hurt, but with things as they are, they can't save him. A memory of humans with their hands up, seemingly surrendering, as a voice says they will trust them not to use their weapons. A younger Alec, crying, resolves that they must start by trusting in each other. Alec asks what if something terrible happens that goes against his sentiment, questioning if he would be able to stop it. Yuito looks back at her, sweating. Amami declares that he would prostrate himself and beg them to stop, and that he would still save anyone, no matter who they are. He admits that's all he can do himself, but he will spare no effort to do it. Alec listens, considering his words. Alec says she'll leave it there for tonight and promptly lies down in his bed. Amami is shocked, asking if she's going to sleep there. A flustered Amami gets out of bed. His slime companion asks if there was something else. The slime companion points out that Alec is older, so she doesn't have to be so formal. It also thanks her for telling them all kinds of things. Alec, looking slightly embarrassed, tells it not to mention it. The scene shifts to the Special Church Soldiers' headquarters, Castrum Custodum. The captured postal worker sits in an interrogation room. A white-haired young man asks if the prisoner has said anything. An official reports that the man claims he was used by a guy with glasses and a beard and knows nothing about the letter. An official reports that he looked into the employee's organization but found no one of interest. The group speculates about the motives, suggesting they might be anti-clericalists or a universalist organization. The official complains about all the things happening lately and asks who stole the bird. He notices the bird in the cage and asks about it. Ekres explains that it's a word bird, a type some mages know about that can be taught to memorize a few words. The others are relieved, realizing the thief must not have known it could talk. The official is pleased they've managed to confirm a little of what the stolen letter said. Ekres prepares to reveal what the bird remembered. The official declines to hear the message, feeling it's information only for those who need to know. He departs, telling them to call on him again if needed. Ekres is asked where they go from here. Ekres seems to use a power. The word bird in its cage crackles with energy and utters 2 words, World Tree. The group looks on with serious expressions. The next morning, Korone finds Amami, who slept outside, and he explains he couldn't really sleep in his room. He notices his bedroom door is open. He looks inside to find that Alec is gone. Over breakfast, Korone excitedly says she learned a lot yesterday, and Amami is pleased. Amami suggests that once she's used to it, he'd like Korone to give lectures too. He explains the concept of near-peer teaching, where one learns by teaching others. Korone is flustered at the thought of teaching, and we see a glimpse of her nervously starting a lecture. There's a knock at the door. It's Mayad calling for Amami-sama. Korone excitedly guesses it must be about the business from yesterday, and Amami confirms. They head out to meet a waiting group. Lupco is told the Prime Minister will join the talk, and wonders what it could be about. Mayad asks Lupco if she would be the Elf Kingdom Hospital's exclusive artist. Lupco is shocked at the idea of being hired by the government, but Mayad assures her she'll be paid a proper salary. Lupco is overwhelmed with happiness but asks why. Amami explains that while drawing the diagram yesterday, he thought pictures would get the message across better and immediately thought of asking her. He asks what she thinks, though he worries it might not be the kind of work she wants to do. Lupco enthusiastically accepts the offer, declaring she'd be delighted. Just then, a voice calls out to Yuito. It's Alec, asking if she can borrow him for a second. Startled, Amami nervously agrees. Alec tells Amami to stop being so formal and asks if he knows what a certain fruit is. She reveals she has an idea for how to make holy water, and she wants to give a lecture to teach people, asking if he's interested. On a bridge overlooking the world tree, a woman remarks to her companion that the tree seems unfit to exist anymore. The man, her sensei, calls the situation outrageous and insists they must act at once. Fia disagrees, stating they should wait. She states they haven't been discovered yet and that they should consider what's best for those folks. Her sensei is left wondering who she means. The sensei stresses that the crucial thing is for both sides to show proper self-restraint and etiquette, and that they need to investigate whether making contact is feasible. Fia observes that humans stand out too much for any covert action to work, and since the sensei is drawing attention, she decides to stay behind. The sensei is alarmed by Fia's words, calling her plan too dangerous and asking her to fill him in on the details later. Fia explains her objective, to find out if there's any chance this land could become a friend to humans. Ekres listens intently to the developments. The sensei is shocked to learn that Lintvium is on the mend. He realizes this land's healing techniques could be dangerous for them, while Fia remarks that if that's the case, then there is no hope. He warns her that using birds will be her only method for detailed reports and that she'll need to make quick decisions, telling her to back off if things get dangerous. Amami asks Fia about holy water and expresses concern that giving a lecture about it might be bad news for her. Fia assures him she'll stick to information that is safe to share, but will definitely be useful. Mayad suggests they discuss the matter further and bring the Prime Minister, Princess, and Queen into the loop. Amami questions Fia's sudden urge to teach them about this topic. Fia leans in close to a flustered Amami and tells him she'll be waiting for his answer. She then turns and walks away. Amami is left stunned by the encounter. In a bustling street within the World Tree, carts make their way through the crowd. Alec is greeted by someone named Hugh, and she asks what he is carrying. Hugh explains he's delivering a new tool for Amami-sensei and mentions that Amami has been out all morning. A girl peeking from the cart whispers, asking if Hugh is scared of dragons, and he tells her he will go find Amami. Alec notices how packed the cart is and offers to help carry the bulky tool before she goes to look for him. Hugh politely declines, saying he's got it and urges her to go find the sensei. The group arrives at Lupco's place. She apologetically welcomes them into her messy art studio. Amami, Korone, and Mayad are stunned into silence, looking around in awe. The room is filled with beautiful paintings. Sketches and other works are hung up around the room. Amami is completely captivated by Lupco's talent, exclaiming how wonderful her work is. Lupco blushes at the praise. Amami muses that it seems like a waste for such a skilled artist to only create pictures for lectures. Lupco quickly clarifies that she hardly ever sells her work and would be thrilled to have the job. Amami is puzzled by her comment about painting pieces she doesn't intend to sell. Lupco begins to tell her story, mentioning her kind father who worked as a delivery man. She explains that when she was a child, her mother passed away from an illness. She explains that her father became very depressed, blaming himself for being away from home so often, and he completely stopped flying. He supported her desire to move to a populated area to sell her paintings, but she admits she's very worried about having left him behind on his own. Lupco passionately declares her dream to paint many pictures of the outside world so her father can experience it through her art, hoping to inspire him to fly again. Her friends listen, moved by her story. Lupco admits there's a problem. She's gained weight and can no longer fly, making it tricky to go home and show him her paintings. Amami suggests they all work on dieting together. Just then, Alec arrives, having been looking for Amami. She asks if he was at Lupco's place and chides him for wandering around without her. Alec hopes the 6 stars haven't bothered him again, but Amami and Korone's reactions leave her confused. Amami mentions he's having Mayad check with the government about the holy water Fia mentioned, though Alec is wary of the name. Alec asks about the big tool Hugh and Lim were delivering. Amami explains that it's a platform scale, an important tool for dieting. He excitedly adds that he plans to use it as a body weight scale. Korone is unfamiliar with the term body weight scale. Amami explains that body weight is incredibly important in medicine and that he wants to use the scale to objectively measure Lupco's weight loss. He provides a brief history of weight measurement's role in medicine, founded by Santorio. Alec mentions that her weight changes significantly when she's a dragon, a fact that intrigues Amami from a medical standpoint. Amami reflects on how much he still doesn't understand about this world and wants to learn as much as he can. He declares his goal is to save as many people as possible, which his companions support. Amami marvels at the craftsmanship of the new scale. He decides to test it immediately with a weight. He places a 50 kg weight on the scale. Alec asks about the writing on it, prompting Amami to explain the concept of a kilogram. Korone quickly makes the connection, realizing that since the saline containers are 500 ml, 2 of them make a liter. Amami confirms she's right, impressed by her quick thinking. He then mutters to himself about the complexities of precise measurement, considering variables like temperature and this planet's gravity. Alec impatiently tells him she gets it, startling Amami and Korone. Amami sets the large weights on the scale, making it 60 kg. He adjusts the beam's weight to 4 kg, for a total of 64 kg. He announces his weight is 64 kg and steps onto the scale. He explains that when the lines match up, the weight is correct. Alec points out that the lines on the scale don't match. Amami realizes he's gained 2 kg, sheepishly blaming it on his clothes and lack of sleep, as Korone suggests they diet together with Lupco. Amami apologetically agrees. Suddenly, Chloe and a tall, masked figure appear. Amami recognizes the man as Old-Timer-san. The man introduces himself as Murcha and greets Amami. Amami apologizes for the nickname, while Alec comments on how rude it was. Chloe excitedly tells Amami that the experiment using vibration magic he asked her to try was a success. Amami is surprised she was able to do it, while Korone asks about the experiment. Chloe offers to demonstrate her new ability. Chloe, now blindfolded, stands ready for the demonstration. A large bowl of water is prepared. Murcha holds a small, cross-shaped object. He drops it into the water. He then adds another oddly shaped item. Finally, he drops in a piece of corn. The others watch with anticipation. Chloe dips her hand into the bowl. The water crackles with energy around her. An image of a dagger materializes on the water's surface. She begins to identify the object. With her eyes still covered, Chloe correctly identifies the items in the water: a dagger, a chili pepper, and a slice of corn. Murcha confirms she is correct, and the group applauds her amazing ability. Amami, realizing the potential, excitedly plans the next step. Amami shows Chloe a rough anatomical diagram and asks her to use her vibration magic on him to see if she can perceive his internal organs. Chloe is shocked by the request. She realizes that using her magic on a person could be dangerous enough to rip him apart. Alec is horrified, reminding him that the magic crushed rocks and questioning why they would try it on him. Korone gulps nervously. Amami calmly explains that since his own body is the only one whose internal structure he knows, he is the only viable person to practice on. Korone and Alec look on with concern. Amami explains that if the test works, it will greatly expand the range of examinations they can perform. Seeing his determination, a nervous but resolute Chloe agrees to his request. Amami lies down on a bed, ready for the experiment to begin. With a determined cry, Chloe unleashes her vibration magic towards him. Amami directs Chloe to start at a specific angle on his abdomen. Chloe places her hands on him, concentrating. She begins to perceive the shapes inside. She sees an image and realizes the layout of the shadows looks similar to the picture. Chloe asks about another area. Her companions watch with bated breath. She moves her hands to a new position. With a sigh of relief, she confirms that she can see it, and it's exactly like the picture. The experiment is a resounding success, and everyone celebrates. Alec breathes a sigh of relief. Chloe thanks Murcha for the sweat, and he commends her for a job well done. Amami sheepishly admits he was only sweating because he was nervous about something bad happening. Amami asks Chloe if she can draw what she saw inside him. Chloe is stunned by the request. He explains that since she is the only one who can perceive it, she needs to be able to share what she felt through pictures. Chloe's attempt at drawing results in a page of unintelligible scribbles. The others are confused by her drawing. She admits she's not very good at drawing, but Murcha laughs and reassures her that she'll get the hang of it with some practice. Korone remembers Lupco's amazing pictures, and Amami gets the idea to ask her to teach Chloe. He apologizes to Chloe, acknowledging that he's asking a lot of her, especially with their local anesthetic running low. Chloe, however, says it would be an honor to help. Lintvium apologizes to Shia for the sudden meeting. Mayad presents a Kurnabu nut to the group. Shia asks if it's true that these nuts are related to a certain matter. Shia is shocked when Shia asks if the nuts are what holy water is made from. Shia confirms this is apparently true, but the church doesn't officially acknowledge its existence, adding that Kurnabu was originally used on livestock to ward off curses. Shia asks if her senpai was the one who provided this information. Mayad confirms that the individual suggested giving a lecture about it. Shia observes that the information doesn't seem false. She wonders about the humans' intentions, especially since their lands must want to keep healing information secret. She questions whether they can be trusted. Lintvium considers the situation. If the information can be used, it would help with Yuito-san's healing, but if it's just talk, it could cause trouble. She notes their own lack of knowledge about the nuts, and this senpai is a problem, given how hard Yuito is working to help them. Lintvium concludes they have no choice but to turn to Shia for help again, and asks her to be present at the lecture. Shia is moved that Lintvium trusts her. Touched by this display of trust, Shia firmly accepts the responsibility. Amami's group decides to head over to Lupco's place again. Alec quietly pulls Murcha aside to speak with him privately. She tells him it's about Amami. She expresses concern that at this rate he will continue to perform all the risky experiments on himself first. Alec looks at Murcha with determination and makes a request. She wants him to test the local anesthetic on her.